family. Welcome to the second episode of the Eyes Wide Open podcast. I am so happy to introduce Tony Gosling. I followed him for years, and I absolutely love what he talks about, and I love to get his opinion on things, what's happened today and everything like that. Would you just like to introduce yourself a little bit more, Tony, to the people who might just not know?
Yeah, okay. I'll tell you what, James, I'm going to ask you a question. What do you know about me?
So, what I do know about you is that you're an investigative journalist. I've watched a few of your lectures on talking about World War II and Martin Bormann. I've also watched you go on different news stations talking about current situations today. That's where I kind of have a little look on, especially what happened in Bristol. I saw your debate. Also, I've watched you on Alternative Views as well. Do a few lectures for, is it a guy called Ian? So that's pretty much
okay.
The Bilderberger.
Yeah, well, okay, so I'll tell you about this, how I got started in this. I was working in the aviation business in the 1980s and getting sort of bored with it, really. I mean, you know, I got into that mainly because of an enthusiasm for planes as a teenager, right? Which is just a sort of, oh, wow, that's an amazing airplane. And it was a sort of childish thing. And once I got into the industry, I realised it was not actually such a nice industry. I mean, one of the nicest things about it actually was the very professional approach to safety, and the way that all the parts were traceable, that people had a very, very frank attitude about near misses and things like this, and that the pilots really were genuinely looking out for each other, even though they were highly paid. There was an absolutely professional approach to safety, but I mean, I just realised that it wasn't enough of a challenge, and I thought I wanted something that's going to challenge me. This is really my late 20s. I want something that's going to challenge me more than this. I want something that's going to be every day I wake up and have a different problem to deal with, story to tell, whatever. And I realised that if I didn't really have a strong go at doing journalism, then I was wasting my life away, really. And anyway, so I got into there's a guy called Duncan Campbell, who was an investigative journalist at the BBC in the 80s, and he did some fantastic stuff. A whole series in 86, I think it was, called Secret Society, which was blowing the lid off the establishment, really, under the Director General Alistair Milne. And I just thought, this is for me. So I went and did a bit of training for nearly a year at community radio, which was run by, or started anyway, by the Greater London Council under Ken Livingstone in London, and picked up how to do radio, basically. And then they were privatised. It was a great little project, but it all got taken over, and I just couldn't do it anymore. The new people running it were a completely different breed than Bob, the guy that had previously run it from Cornwall, and I knew I had to jump ship there rather than be pushed, and I wasn't going to do the stuff anyway. So I ended up having breakfast with a news editor and one of the news producers at Greater London Radio at the time. That would be 1988, 89 time, and so they actually liked me. I got on well with them over breakfast. I was quite cheeky, saying I don't like this is a bit slack, blah, blah, and they respected that. And it was a guy called James Cameron was the news editor at the time. And Greater London Radio in the late 80s was an incredibly popular station in London. And so I was very chuffed to be asked, well, OK, come along one day a week and we'll pay you your train fare and stuff. So I was just literally a volunteer at the BBC for about a week, and I was approached by one of the producers who said, "Well, look, we'll just put you on a freelance salary," and so I don't know you can do that anymore, because the BBC is now pretty much a ivory tower closed shop, and they don't even accept contributions from freelancers nowadays, which has been part of their downfall. And so I worked there in the newsroom in Marylebone High Street for about 18 months, and really picked up how to do proper news. And it's quite scary going from a little community radio station in Thamesmead in southeast London into the real thing. So that's how I got into doing journalism at the top end. It was really because we had a very good investigative team. We had some fantastic producers. But as I was there, I could witness the changes going on at the BBC and some of the best people being sort of, insulted by some of the senior producers and the programme organiser, a guy called Trevor Dan, who was bringing in his mates. And you could see there was this slight rot going on with the best people being sidelined and nepotism starting to creep in. And it was just, we all were discussing it, Anyway, I didn't join the union at that time. I joined the union quite a bit later, but I went on to some other BBC local stations after that. And, I got the bug, basically. And once you'd learned how to do this stuff, the BBC finally gave me the elbow in Salisbury, in Wiltshire what would that be, about 1994. I didn't realise why they were doing it. It was because I was investigating child sexual abuse now, I think, and we were doing me and another freelancer there were doing an investigation into child sexual abuse in Salisbury. We didn't make the connection at the time with Edward Heath, who was living there, and it was at 2 kids' homes in the city. And we had very good evidence from some of the parents about what was going on. We were starting to investigate, the guy that was in charge of it was the deputy chairman of the Conservative Party on Salisbury District Council. He ran both of those homes. And that we were told, I spoke to one of the senior, I think it was a senior reporter or a news producer at Wiltshire Sound where I was working. I said, well, look, we've got this information. They said, oh, well, actually, we've spoken to the police about this. Why? Why have you spoken to the police? You're telling the police what we're doing? No. But anyway, so we were told, the police have looked into it and there's nothing to it. So we were supposed to leave it at that. We had all these allegations and we're not supposed to do anything. Anyway, about a month and a half later, I was told, your services are no longer required, no contract being renewed, blah, blah. So I was out on my elbow. Anyway, so that was my parting with the BBC. And I really enjoyed that work. But of course, if you're not able to report on the big stories like child sexual abuse going on in your town, what is the point of reporting on the bottle bank? So I went after that. I went on and did some campaigning with a guy called George Monbiot, who's now a very well-known Guardian columnist. He was just at the time getting his Guardian column by doing some good writing around environmental stuff. And getting into the good books of John Vidal, who was the Guardian's environment editor. And with George, we went and occupied various places. We called ourselves The Land Is Ours, and we did these big occupations along with people from the Green Party and the squatters groups in London. And we had great fun, doing actions which were great. We got hundreds of people down there, and we're drawing attention to the lack of access to land for people, and particularly for travellers, etc. And that was cool. Yeah, so we occupied various places, probably most famously St George's Hill in Surrey in 1999, after George had left, which was where the diggers were in the English Civil War, who were also land rights activists. And that place that the diggers took over in the Civil War, which had so many effects around the world, and they were an incredible group. They just said, well, if you're going to get rid of the king, well, everyone can have the land, can't they? But of course, that didn't turn out that way. And so we did that for a few years, and at the end of that, I suppose, it was the Beverly Hills of Britain. That's the mad thing about that. St George's Hill in Surrey, near Weybridge. That was occupied by these, land rights people in the Civil War in 1649, and it's now this private gated estate, So anyway, so just trying to zip through this. So then I got back into journalism in Bristol in the late noughties, and I started a programme about, I think it was 2007, 2008. On Bristol Community Radio, which I got booted off of rather unceremoniously in 2020 by Pat Hart, who's the station manager, who is very friendly with the Blairite Mayor Marvin Rees. And it's quite obvious why he got rid of me off the radio, even though the board have had a look at it all. They have decided, no, there's nothing to see here, and it's not a political decision. But I mean, I've been on Russia Today during that time. I've been on Turkish TV quite a bit. I've also done BBC pieces with Andrew Neil. as well as quite a regular on this Press TV, the Uranium channel, which is great. It's a real privilege to be on there, even though it's banned in the UK. So most of the world is watching it and seeing me doing my commentary 3 or 4 times a week on there at various events. But the rest of the world is not allowed to see it because Press TV has been banned by Ofcom. And, of course, Ofcom have banned a tremendous amount of the coverage of this more modern pandemic, or plandemic, whatever you want to call it, by saying, oh, you've just got to trot out the government line. Effectively, that's what Ofcom are saying. And that government line has led to the death of tens of thousands of people. So Ofcom are actually complicit in all that. And they shall obviously be prosecuted for accessory to manslaughter at the very least. You know, this is a so-called broadcast regulator helping the country and the government to, deliver people into the hands of hospitals who are, through their completely erroneous protocols, have been killing people, basically through putting people into comas and on ventilators and treating them for pneumonia, when actually they've got SARS, which is treated in a completely different way with drugs like ivermectin. So, you know, this is the sort of stuff we were doing, but we was prevented from actually being on air by this guy, Pat Hart, and also by Ofcom. So that's where we are now, basically. Yeah, that's where I am.
Tony, to be honest, I watch you on that, right? Is it the Tehran, is it? Is it Tehran?
Yeah, on Press TV is based in Tehran, yeah.
Yeah, Press TV, and I watched you recently talk about what happened in Bristol with the Kill Bill and the freedom. Well, the bill what's basically giving us the freedom to protest. What's your thoughts on that, Tony? Do you think that's going to carry on? Do you think they're going to pass that?
Well, I honestly don't know whether it... I mean, obviously there's... Well, OK, so one thing's absolutely clear here. We've got something like 1 million people in Britain who are on the edge of not being able to pay their mortgage and their rent. So those are the people who are looking at this bill and thinking, what, you want to criminalise trespass? So if I occupy an empty building because I've been evicted, you're going to criminalise me, you're going to throw me in jail. And the travellers are thinking, well, so if I park up on the verge of a road, which is what gypsies and travellers have been doing since roads were invented thousands of years ago, that you're going to criminalise me, you're going to throw me in jail, my kids in jail, and my whole family, and you're going to steal my house and put it in a pound. Now that's why people are angry about this bill. It's those are the main people who are going to be affected by this. I think people who are having problems with their housing and trying to sort it out through, whether it's people in vehicles or squatting. I mean, we've got hundreds at least of people squatting in Bristol because they have been evicted from their homes. Where are they supposed to go? Are they going to sit in a shop doorway, or what, are they going to go into one of these council paid for hostels where there's loads of hard drugs hanging around? You're going to take your kids in there, are you? So this is really a kind of gaslighting by the government, and actually the same exact tactics which were used by the Nazi Party in 1934, arresting gypsies, basically anybody that doesn't conform. You have to remember, of course, in the early 30s, the Nazi Germany had Hitler brought a kind of recovery, didn't he? But there was horrendous living conditions, housing conditions, etc. But they were saying, well, if you're trying to sort yourself out with a vehicle, you're living on the road, or you've been evicted, you're a criminal. And this is really a disgusting way for any government to treat its people. And Priti Patel's behind all this. She's at the Home Office, same Home Office that was investigating itself, its own child sexual abuse and cover-ups of child sexual abuse in the inquiry into child sexual abuse. The Home Office is probably the most rotten part of government. They lost all these files on the paedophiles. They did an investigation along with the Metropolitan Police into Freemasonry and corruption, and then they didn't publish that. And even though they'd found they got a whole lot of coppers working on it, but they never published it. They've also stopped they got rid of the Standards Council, which was making sure that people who are in secret societies declare their interest if they're involved in government or in the civil service. So they're absolute, it's basically run by organised crime. And, and the paedophilia is an interesting angle on it. I've picked up over the years, which is the paedophilia is really about, I think, mainly to do with the Epstein style stuff, which is not anything more than blackmail. This is a blackmail trap. So you're put with these young girls or young boys or whatever, and everything's filmed. And then when you finish, you leave. You know it's been filmed because maybe someone tells you, or maybe you pick it up because of what happened to Prince Andrew, and all the press stories about the cameras running in Epstein's house and probably in Elm Guest House as well in London. So that's another side of the Home Office which is absolutely appalling. So that's what's behind this. And Priti Patel herself, the Home Secretary at the moment, in 2017 or 2018, was proven to be a traitor and booted out of the cabinet by Theresa May because she'd been on a family holiday, but she'd been having those secret meetings with Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli government and various Israeli officials when she was on a private holiday. So she is she's not loyal to the British, or to Britain. She's loyal to a foreign power. And she, of course, should be nowhere near any positions of power. And I think this is what's enraging people, is we know that you're a traitor, you're a crook, you're a criminal. Boris should sack you, but he hasn't got the guts. And now you're trying to ram through a bill which is criminalising the poorest million people in Britain. And if you think you're going to get away with it, you better think again, Priti.
Well, I'm totally with you. I didn't know that Priti Patel had been thrown out of her cabinet. And
well, yeah, she was DFID secretary back in 2017. She was Department for International Development secretary, and she was off having sneaky meetings with foreign governments and not telling anyone in Britain about it. And then they found out, and then they said, "No, you've got to leave, get out." And in fact, she was on a plane going to Africa, and the plane had to turn round, or I'm not sure if she got to the airport and then came straight back to Britain. She said, "Oh, I can't come back to Britain. I'm on a plane to Africa." So anyway, she's a crook. She's a traitor. The idea that she is in any way a competent Home Secretary, she was the one that, it's now been leaked, ordered the police to smash up the vigil for Sarah Everard in Clapham Common. And, that's now well known. The Guardian got a leaked memo, and the police do this. If they think something, and the Home Office maybe even, if they think somebody is behaving appallingly like a fascist, then they'll leak stuff to the newspapers, and the Guardian printed that. They don't always print the stuff. They don't always print the leaks. But anyway, it's been proven that it is Priti Patel directly and everyone was calling for Cressida Dick to resign. Well, yes, of course she should, but actually it's the one who gave the orders, the one who sent the memo, break up this vigil to Sarah Everard. Now, remember, of course, that this is a vigil about a woman who was, it looks like now, murdered, or allegedly, by a serving police officer of the Diplomatic and Royal Protection Squad, who had exposed himself in a kebab shop, allegedly, 3 days previously, and not been arrested. Nothing had been done about that. So if they'd have arrested him for that, he wouldn't have been able to allegedly murder this Sarah Everard, would he? So the Metropolitan Police are absolutely, their absolute incompetence is written all over this, and there should be sackings. This year, Boris and other leading members of the government had any guts at all, and if the press should be pushing them to do this all the time, and destroying their credibility for simply not sacking these senior police and not sacking Priti Patel for weighing into that demonstration. So. Yeah, we're living in what is beginning to approach a tyranny. It certainly feels like a one-party state now, where you've got Keir Starmer just, begging Boris, to, patting him on the back for everything he does, basically, and either abstaining or saying, you should be destroying civil liberties even more than you are, Boris. So the only real opposition now is within the Conservative Party.
But what do we do, Tony? Because, you got the one side even worse, wanting more of this, and where do we turn from here? That's where it's like, what's your thoughts on the London Mayor running? Because I've looked at the people who are running for it, like Brian Rose and Lauren Fox. Well,
look, just a minute, Brian Rose, just kick him out the door, please, because Brian he's the. I've absolutely no time for the guy. He's the sort of guy who's been pushing the David Icke stuff. David Icke has kicked off the whole psychological warfare campaign by going on about, the virus doesn't exist. even when 2 months before it had been sequenced and the genome had been published by the Chinese, blah, blah. So, but I mean, look, the obviously person to vote for in London is Piers Corbyn, and his, is it Let London Breathe? What's it called? The London Party he's doing? I'm not quite sure. You know, Let London Be Free or something. But anyway, he's the obvious person, because the more people vote for him, what you'll get is you'll get members of the London Assembly, because it's a proportional system, which Priti Patel wants to reverse, of course, because she's like a sort of colonial dinosaur, basically. I mean, Sadiq Khan is appalling. He's putting on all these various taxes on everybody. If you've got a brand spanking new, you know, £150,000 Range Rover, you pay nothing, you know, and if you've got an ordinary car, you have to pay every time you drive in and out of London. You know, the guy's not a socialist, he's just part of the elite, and they are taking the mickey, these people, out of ordinary people, and obviously the press is kind of going along with it. I think, isn't it the Evening Standard, which is owned by the Saudis now? You know, you've got all sorts of ownership, press ownership. They quickly change. I would say a couple of things, though, about Fox News and Talk Radio, because I'm a fan of both, really. Because I mean, the BBC is just appalling to listen to, although they have the occasional thing. But the Fox News' Steve Hilton has been brilliant on the Next Revolution on Sunday evenings, exposing not just that the virus was manufactured in a lab in Wuhan, or leaked from a lab in Wuhan, nothing to do with bats, like the Who say. But also, and he's done a super job on this. He's a former Cameron advisor, by the way. He's exposed also the links to US money funding this research, and the way that Obama stopped it, and then kicked out Fauci, moved all this research out of the country. Now, Fauci, of course, is a very, very close, as James Corbett's exposed very nicely, associate of Bill Gates, you know, Mr. Monopolist, the guy that wants to control the world's farming systems and starve us to death, and then we have to come begging to him for some food. And he's keeping all of these plants, a little seed bank, you know, in Iceland somewhere, was it Greenland, actually, in order so that once he's wiped out the planet, that he can be the only person everyone has to go and buy seeds from him. You know, he's going to control all this God-given genetic material. So, yeah, you know, this is just bonkers, isn't it? So, you know, vote for Piers. He's a good guy, you know, he's an honest bloke, and he will, I think, you know, he'd be quite a good, I don't know if he'll win, but at least getting 2 or 3 is a good plan. I don't like Sadiq Khan at all. I mean, he was a lawyer for I think some of the 7/7 victims, and well, if you want to talk to me about 7/7, as a former London radio journalist at the BBC, I was working on IRA bombings when I was there. The 7/7 was done, I think, by the Israelis. It was a company called Verint Systems who had access to the tube tunnels. I think they put bombs underneath the trains, and then they blamed these poor 4 guys who I think were involved in drugs, and they thought they were coming down to do a drug deal in London, and probably just put them in a room and blew them to smithereens, and then gave their bodies back to their families and blamed them for the killing, you know, and there's plenty of evidence that the main evidence really is that the bombs were almost certainly underneath the trains and not in the trains. If you look at the evidence of that, the window, all the glass, you know, you would expect it to have come out, but it didn't. It went in, and also the trains lifted up off the track, where if the bomb was inside, it would be pushed down onto the track. So, you know, there's no CCTV either of any of these guys either getting onto or off the trains, funnily enough. And none at all. Nothing. In fact, Jon Snow, bless him, on Channel 4 News, as that whole thing unfolded in 2005 and 6, he actually did a news programme down in the tunnels, and he counted all the CCTV cameras that were everywhere, including the ones on the trains. Hundreds of them that they should have got CCTV footage of. Nothing at all. Not a single thing. So, you know, it's obviously a put-up job of some sort. The other thing is the bomb was almost on the bus, was almost certainly left up on the top deck by someone who was seen by Daniel Obachicki. At least that's what he says. He said he saw this guy, he looked uncomfortable, and then he came down without his rucksack, and then as the bus pulled away, it blew up. You know, so there's no proper investigation been into 7/7. The anti-terrorist branch are basically the biggest terrorists in the country. They're part of the Metropolitan Police, and also that same section which this guy who allegedly murdered Sarah Everard was part of that.
There's always a link, isn't there, Tony? It's getting it's like you could write this story, couldn't you? Sometimes it's with Israel, it keeps popping up, doesn't it? And I don't understand how nobody is being more vocal about this. And it's like everyone's scared to be more vocal about this.
Well, I'll tell you why. The reason why so many, particularly journalists, are is because if you mention Israel in any kind of negative context, you easily lose your job. It's as simple as that. And anyway, look, I know you phoned me up initially to talk about Martin Bormann, didn't you?
Yes, of course I did. Yeah, I did.
Because this story is one of the most mind-blowing. I mean, it's not me doing this investigation. I've been putting together jigsaw pieces from all sorts of other people, and probably the most important of all of them that got me onto this is a guy called John Ainsworth Davis, who goes under the pen name of Christopher Crichton, and he wrote a book in 1996 called Op JB, which was about. I mean, at the time when it was published, people were just mind-blown by it. And even though he had letters in there from, I think it was Winston Churchill and Mountbatten, saying, yes, this did happen, etc. And yes, you did do it, and you can publish this after I die, from Winston Churchill. And what they'd done is they were highly trained commandos at the end of the Second World War. And Ian Fleming, the Bond author, was involved in getting them down to Berlin, parachuted them in, and this crew, under the noses of the Russians, smuggled on the final day of the war, which is, well, the fall of Berlin, which the war ended a few days later. But literally the 1st of May, Borman was smuggled out of the Reichschancellery and the Führer bunker, and they even took a double with them who looked like Borman. Poor guy didn't know why he'd been taken there, but then he was killed. They say that he wasn't actually murdered by them, that he was killed by a Russian sniper or something. But so they left the body there, which was supposed to be Borman's body. It had his, the same teeth and everything. He'd been specially groomed for the job. And then they got him in canoes, Borman in canoes, by the Friedrichstrasse railway station bridge. And they went by canal. They went right under the noses of the Russians. They had a couple of people there who could speak fluent Russian and had Russian uniforms. So when they were stopped by Russians, they would start barking orders saying, look, we're on special mission from Stalin, blah, 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 looking for Nazi war criminals. And then the Russian soldiers would back off and let them through. And these commandos included a bunch of Jewish freedom fighters as well, who were based in the UK, had escaped from Nazi Germany and been trained by the Brits and by themselves. And then they came back. There was I think from memory, it was about 30 in that little team, and they brought Borman back safely into the British zone. And where waiting to pick him up was Winston Churchill's private secretary, Desmond Morton, Major Desmond Morton. Now, he was an interesting character all the way through the war. He was basically Borman's equivalent. Borman was Adolf Hitler's private secretary, and he was also the treasurer of the Nazi Party, and he owned, for example, the Berchtesgaden, which was the Eagle's Nest place down in the Austrian-Swiss border, where Hitler liked to spare in his time. That was all owned, actually property owned by Borman. And Hitler liked Borman because he seemed to be able to get things done. But the only trouble was that by that time, and a long time before actually, I think he'd been working for the British, been working very closely with the British in the last few years of the war. As you know, in 1943 it became obvious after Stalingrad that the Germans had lost. And Borman, I don't think he had any particular real ideologies, but he pretended to have, in order, to be a Nazi, and enthusiastic Nazi, hated Jews, whatever, in order to convince people. He realised that, they'd lost, and, that he wanted to basically be a good gangster and be on the winning side. So he would switch allegiances easily if he thought that was a way to make more money or to be part of the winning team. He would do that, and that's what he did, I think, in 1943 or 44. And he managed it's very interesting that in 1941, in May, just before the Barbarossa invasion of Russia, an attack on Stalin by Hitler, who had a pact with Stalin, which was really the beginning of the end for the Nazis. Bormann was the secretary to Rudolf Hess, who was deputy Führer. Now, Hess and Hitler had gone back a long, long way together, right the way to the origins of the Nazi Party in the 20s. And so Hess was in the way, really. So Bormann couldn't influence Hitler as much because he still had his pal Hess with him. So there was a great plot hatched by MI6 to get their man, Bormann, closer to Hitler and Hess out of the way. And that's why I think we had this ridiculous flight of Rudolf Hess in 1941. He flew to Scotland. He flew up the North Sea, just out of radar range, and then he flew in very fast in this Messerschmitt 110 into Scotland. And he was about to land, and I've just recently found out it's highly likely that Prince George, that King George VI's younger brother, was waiting at RAF Dundonald in the west of Scotland for him. The only thing is Hess was a little bit late, and it was so dark he couldn't navigate. It was, too dark to navigate, so he had to flip about. He had to go back and, try and find his way again. Incidentally, there were no fighters scrambled to, even though we had radar, obviously, right? There were no fighters scrambled to intercept this plane, so clearly they had orders, just let the plane through. And it was something that, it wasn't just a spontaneous act. It was all prearranged by MI6. And so when he finally, he got lost his way, but he realised roughly where he was. He didn't know where there was an airfield he could land, but he bailed out. And Hess landed. And what happened was, rather than secretly and quietly meet Prince George, obviously he'd been gotten out of the way. The job was done. So long as Bormann, back in Nazi Germany, was promoted to be Hitler's secretary then. And, Hess was out of the way, interfering Hess. And so Hitler was, then being basically controlled. Access to him was controlled by Bormann. But just to go back briefly to what happened in Scotland, the plan was, I think, to keep things secret. It's obvious, to anyone with a brain that if they were going to do a coup in Britain, because that was the plan. The plan was to have peace with Britain so that all of them could fight the Russians. And Hess believed this, and various people believed it, but it was all just a ruse, I think, anyway, to get Hess out of the way. But the thing is, where he landed, it was reported straight away to the Glasgow Herald, and so it was all on the news and everything. Rudolf Hess has popped up, so they couldn't keep it secret. Anyway, he ended up in Spandau prison after the war, and he wasn't allowed to talk to anybody. But it's a fascinating little tale about what happened to Hess. But the main point of that was Tancred Brenius, who was the Finnish ambassador to Nazi Germany, was one of the people who MI6 persuaded to, and his son I met, by the way, bizarrely, when I was working at Wiltshire Sound, a guy called Peter Brenius, and I did a piece with him about the local rivers around there. So it's a small world. But anyway, so Borman, I've actually done a timeline in the book. The book is called The Traitors of Arnhem. And it's really about the battle in 1944, in September 1944, filmed in the film A Bridge Too Far, and it's Operation Market Garden, it was called, and the idea was, after D-Day, to punch a hole in the German lines right to the Ruhr, over the Rhine, and it was an absolutely brilliant plan by Montgomery, but it just wasn't going to be allowed to happen. And it was a very brave thing. But what I've discovered now is it's almost certain that there were forces there, because Martin Bormann's Red House meeting in August 1944, what that had done was basically set up a Fourth Reich. They realised they'd lost. Remember, this is after, it was the Falaise Gap battle in, I think it was July or June, and the Germans realised we have absolutely had it, so what we're going to do is we're going to spend the last few months of the war squirreling away our wealth around the world and aiding the international organised crime mafia to create all these front companies which we're going to control. So the whole process began in August. Now, there's all sorts, August 44, there's all sorts of reasons why, I think now this is basically the force that we're dealing with, and the fourth, Industrial Revolution is more like that kind of Fourth Reich. And so,
honestly, Tony, do you honestly believe that's what we did? It was like from that far back.
Well, yeah, because that was seeding the banking system and the industrial system, particularly of Europe, but of all parts of the Western world, really, to be working in lockstep with each other to certain purposes. And anyway, so August 44, the Red House meeting in Strasbourg. This is where they made these plans and they put it all into motion. Everything started. Borman didn't go. He was very clever, actually. He didn't go to that meeting, but he set the whole thing up. And he knew what was going to happen, and he had a report back afterwards. Very much the same as the Wannsee conference, which was all about the final solution, killing as many Jews as they possibly can, the extermination meeting. Borman cleverly stays away, doesn't he? He sets the agenda, but he say, "Oh, it's nothing to do with me," you know. Anyway, so he was a really devious character, but and this is what makes his, and particularly his responsibility for the Holocaust, makes his associations with the British Secret Services so absolutely toxic and explosive, actually. But anyway, so September 1944, you've got this operation to get over the Rhine. You've got the US 101st and 82nd Airborne Divisions landing in Eindhoven and Nijmegen, around those cities, and then the British in Arnhem, and which is the spearhead of the attack in Arnhem. So it's absolutely obvious now that some of the key figures in that operation were traitors. They were making sure that the operation failed, and they didn't care how many British soldiers were mauled and killed in what they called the Hexenkessel, which was called the Witch's Cauldron, which is the surrounded British soldiers at Arnhem and in Oosterbeek, which is a neighbouring a part of Arnhem, just a kind of outlying area just to the west along the river Rhine, or the Neder Rhine it's called. And I actually went there to do this talk, The Traitors of Arnhem, a few years ago, which was fascinating to meet people from the area, some of whom, the older people who remembered it, what it was like as kids when they were children. They also told me, James, something incredible, which I could not believe, which was, obviously I do believe it because they told me this, and they said, well, in the years of the 1950s and 60s, this place was teeming with ghosts, right? There were loads of ghosts of these murdered British soldiers, or, massacred soldiers in the Witch's Cauldron in the battle. Because remember, they have only kind of basically light arms when they landed as paratroopers. They did have a little bit of artillery, a few anti-tank guns, but most of those had gone down to the bridge, and they weren't getting resupplied. They weren't getting any new ammunition or whatever. So they're basically fighting with a few guns, rifles, machine pistols, maybe some grenades, but very, very light. And they were surrounded by some of the crack troops of the SS Panzer divisions, and they were absolutely massacred. It was just a massacre, and this whole business is infamy. Anyway, so the main point of the how we lost the battle was that we got Peter Carrington, who later went on to become Secretary General of NATO. He was Defence Secretary on the day of Bloody Sunday, so he was responsible for the paratroopers firing into the Irish Republican unarmed civilians that started the troubles in Northern Ireland in 1972. Peter Carrington was there at the bridge at Nijmegen, sitting in his little tank, with Moffat Burries, who was from the 82nd Airborne Division, who just crossed the Neder Rhine in a little boat and been shot at and lost half his men in his company, from crossing the river. They took the bridge, they crossed the river. As the tanks rumbled across, Carrington was, had about 20-minute drive to Arnhem, but they wouldn't go. There was a guy called Sergeant Robinson who went down the road and blasted off, anything that was in the way, but he was told to come back. And so they waited and waited and waited at Nijmegen Bridge with Carrington after they'd taken the bridge, until the British, I think it was about 12 hours, until the last British soldiers at Arnhem Bridge had been killed or surrendered. And they could have won that battle, but they didn't, because it's quite obvious to me now that there were all sorts of attempts to sabotage it, and the final plan came down to Peter Carrington and his senior officers. Do not win, Brian Horrocks was the corps commander, and he was also involved in all this. Look, sit there and wait until the British are gone, and then you can go. And of course, by the time they'd gone, the whole line was reinforced. There was no way they were even going to get close to the Rhine at that point. And that 12 hours, absolutely stinks to me. It's quite clear that what was going on was a sabotage of that operation, which was a sound plan, and the reason to sabotage it is, of course, to allow the Nazis more time to squirrel away their wealth, and to make sure that the Brits are going to cooperate with them in their anti-Russian Cold War that's going to come after the war. These things I think were already being planned. But the maddest thing about all this is the Bilderberg Conference has started in the same spot in Oosterbeek 10 years after that battle. And in fact, they had quite a few SS Nazis at that first in 1954 Bilderberg meeting. So, this is the nub of it, really, is that you've got treachery going on between Desmond Morton during and at the end of the war and after the war, doing deals with these guys. Now, you can understand they've got a lot to give. He's got about $1 billion in 1944 money, which is, a heap more now, probably 500 times more in today's money. He's got these, billions of dollars that are squirreled away in Swiss bank accounts. And Ian Fleming was the one that went to see how much money they got and who had it, just before all this happened. Ian Fleming actually was dressed as a Nazi officer, so no wonder he had his flair for writing. By the way, Fleming, after the war, was an alcoholic because he knew that there'd been so much treachery involved in all of this at the highest levels. He worked for naval intelligence, and he met a guy called Dennis Wheatley, who was a thriller writer and a great occult novelist who wrote a book called the Devil and All His Works, and The Devil Rides Out was a novel. The Devil and All His Works was a non-fiction. But Wheatley said, and he'd been a writer before the war, best-selling writer, and he said to Fleming, look, don't, get upset about this stuff, because, he'd been involved in the core of the Second World War as well, right in the cabinet war rooms. He said, look, just write it as fiction, because if you write it as fiction, they can't touch you. So this is one of the reasons why we've got the Bond novels and the Bond legacy now, and Fleming did. John Ainsworth Davies had a different approach, this other chap who was involved in with Fleming in this mission to get Borman out of Berlin. And John Ainsworth Davies had determined he wasn't going to write a novel, he was going to write a factual account. That's the way he wanted to do it. And so he had to leave it until, he was 15 years away. He died in about 2016, 2017. And I met his wife, actually, Greta, amazing woman, who took me into her house in North London, and I spent, about an hour and a half chit-chatting with her about all this stuff, because, when I knocked at the door, she said, bless her, she said, are you from MI5? I just thought, it's hilarious, absolutely hilarious. But anyway, so these people, I think, were... I mean, the main thing to understand about Morton, for example, when John Ainsworth Davies goes in to get briefed by Morton, he's halfway through the briefing and he's chatting with him, and then he realises there's someone behind him. He turns around, it's the King. King George VI, whose brother, of course, was a total traitor, Edward VIII, the Nazi who married Mrs. Simpson, and he was trying to get to Nazi Germany. I spoke to a former MI6 officer called Harry Beckhoff, who says that he said that people don't realise that Edward and Mrs. Simpson tried to cross enemy lines into Nazi-occupied France and actually get into Nazi Germany. Imagine that if you'd had the former king broadcasting on Radio Luxembourg along with Lord Haw for the Nazis, and they managed to nab him there. The MI6 and Harry's lot got him. And then they went back they were sent over to the Bahamas to get them well out of the way because they were so pro-Nazi. But this is his brother, King George VI, hanging around there. So, I mean, I think it's a fascinating tale to tell here about the real stuff going on behind the Second World War. And maybe, history will understand this in time to come. But the most important thing to understand is that Borman came to the UK. There was almost certainly a double, just in case the Russians had found him, because obviously the Russians wanted him, and they believed that the British had him. And there was a double who lived in Reigate for many years, apparently, someone who looked rather like him. And that guy was. There was also the by the way, the tunnels in Reigate are fascinating. There's a whole bunker on Reigate, just under Reigate Hill, which was a secret bunker for. This is on the North Downs, secret bunker for Churchill and Montgomery, who stayed there. And by the way, it's funny, you've got the Market Pub, and I remember going to Reigate and seeing, it says on the back of here, Market Garden. Yeah, okay, it's the garden of the Market. Great big thing saying Market Garden. I wonder whether that was where. I have no idea whether that was where they got the name from. But there are two big houses there, one which was Montgomery stayed in and one which Churchill stayed in, and his underground bunker that's almost certainly still exists there, in fact. So I had a good old look around that last year. There's always little traces of archaeology of the story here and there. So Morton, he is the key guy. He was with Churchill. I went to Chartwell as well, which is Churchill's house. Would you believe that Desmond Morton, he moved into a house, Early Lands, in Crockham Hill, which is about 20 minutes walk away from Chartwell, right? But Morton was there before Churchill moved into Chartwell. So the obvious question here is, who's in charge? Churchill is moving into a house to be near Morton, not the other way round.
Not the other way round, yeah. Wow,
So photographs of proof that Borman survived the war is not easy to find. There was some terrific, there's even Alan Wicker talking about it on one of his programs years ago. But it was a guy called Stuart Stephen who was a former Bristol Western Daily Press journalist, Jewish guy whose parents had got out of Germany as it was all getting nasty, and he in 1972 was working for the Daily Express as one of their chief foreign correspondents, and he published this amazing story, Martin Bormann is alive, amazing headline in the Daily, I think it was the Saturday Express. And they got pictures in the inside pages of Martin Bormann in Buenos Aires in 1972, age 72, taken by Hungarian investigative journalist Ladislas Farago. And in the book I've got pictures of them next to each other. The historical Bormann, age 44, picture of him as Hitler's private secretary, and then also a picture from Ladislas Farago in 1972. And they certainly look, it looks genuine to me. This is the same guy, an older version. And what was Borman doing? Well, after the war, he used all this money to create 750 companies, which set up all over mostly the Western world. And those companies were then staffed with plainclothes, civilian clothes, SS officers, as their senior executive staff and their board members. Often a Jew was put in charge of the company to disguise the fact that it was a Nazi company. A Fourth Reich company, and then the business was, went on to become a massive business. And these are the monopolistic businesses, I think, many of these that we see today in the world. There is another twist to all of this, and that is to do with we talked a bit about the gold, didn't we?
Yeah.
But what about the uranium? Yeah, the Nazis had a very active, as we know with the heavy waters, the Heroes of Telemark film is all about that. They had a very active nuclear program, much more active than I think most historians realise. In 2017, various papers published this evidence from Germany that because various intelligence reports had been leaked on this side, but first in Germany, there was some guy in Germany came across a whole load of nuclear material. He picked this stuff up, and then he realised, bloody hell, this is on a Geiger counter. It's going way off the scale. And it was he found it in some woods somewhere. And once he realised this, he reported it to the authorities, and they came down on him like a ton of bricks, arrested him. And because of their attitude, he said, I'm not going to tell you where I found it, because of you've got a bad attitude, man. And which is great. The Germans nowadays are some of the most vehement anti-Nazis you'll find, actually, because of having, their parents having lived through it and everything, and also the basic guilt, Anyway, so that was a really interesting incident, finding this nuclear, material, radioactive material in the woods. So there was obviously something going on. And then, about 2018, there were some reports published in the British press about intelligence reports that have been released under, freedom of information type, after so many years. And these were interrogations of, during the war, of after the war, at the end of the war, of German soldiers who had witnessed atomic explosions in Germany. So there were, it looks like now, two atomic tests, one up in the Danish islands around that area up going up towards the Baltic, but not in the Baltic, on the western side of Denmark and down. And then another one in, I think it's called Ludwigsluft in northern Germany somewhere. Two big explosions. Now, so this shouldn't come as any surprise to anyone with half a brain, because where did where was the atomic bomb invented, supposedly, in official stories? It was invented at Nuffield University in Birmingham by Frisch and Piles in 1940 or 41. And they supposedly put these ideas together, and that's how it all started. The British started, and then the Americans picked it up because we said we couldn't afford to develop it here. We had something called the Quebec Agreement, which the Americans said they would share anything they found out because we'd given them so much help. And then, of course, they welched on that at the end of the war, and we had to have our own nuclear program if we wanted a nuclear bomb. But due to this clandestine German nuclear program during the war, which, by the way, wasn't under Albert Speer and his armaments ministry. It was under civilian cover, as so much is. Like, for example, even up to today, the gain of function research of coronavirus is done by Dr. Peter Daszak at Wuhan under Pentagon cover by a nice civilian company. Yeah. So all the weapons WMD development, the very sensitive, evil weapons development, is done outside of, say, the Ministry of Defence or whatever. It's done under a civilian cover. We had our own tube alloys, which was a civilian so-called thing to develop the British nuclear bomb. Anyway, so that was what was going on in Germany, and so they had accumulated a lot of enriched uranium over there, and they were looking to do deals to get it. So it was fascinating for me to see. There's a book by Carter Heydrich called Critical Mass. It's an absolute blockbuster of, looking at the use of Nazi uranium and the fuses, atomic fuses that the Nazis had developed, the infrared fuses, to detonate the plutonium bomb, that came across were used in the Manhattan Project. This was all supposed to be top secret, but it's now, now is the time to talk about it, please. So this is the ironic thing is that it was a submarine called U-235, which set off at the end of the war, and it was going to Japan with two Japanese officers in it, right? So they realised that they'd lost, the Russians were getting close to Berlin, so they thought, we've got to get this nuclear stuff out. So they shoved it in the hull of this submarine, and the submarine started chugging off slowly and quietly for Japan. The idea was, look, let's give the Japs this stuff, and they can maybe put a bomb together, and, if the Americans want to have a fight with them, then they'll be able to give them a bloody nose. And so anyway, this is heading off across the Atlantic to Japan that way, because, that's the only way to get out of the Baltic. You've got to go that way. And so what happens then is the submarine is heading across down towards South America, basically around that way. Maybe it was going to Argentina, we're not really sure. But anyway, the ultimate destination was Spain with two Japanese officers on board. So what happens is the day after Borman is brought back is about the 12th, I think, the 12th of May, 1944. The day after Borman is brought back to Britain, suddenly this submarine, the German submarine, remember Dönitz is now in charge. Hitler's dead, right? The Admiral Dönitz. This submarine changes course. Sorry, first of all, it stops. These two Japanese soldiers are executed, and it changes course, and it meets up with a destroyer from the US Navy, and it's escorted to, I think it's Portland Harbour. I can't remember the name of the harbour, but anyway, so that it was several large barrels full of enriched uranium. Now, obviously, you've got to keep this stuff, separate. You can't, otherwise you get the critical mass, and it all starts fizzing and ionising, and, it won't do a bomb in that state, but it will kill everyone on board. So they had, I'm not sure how many tons it was, it's in the book, of enriched uranium that went on to contribute to the atomic bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So that was really the motivation for a lot of this, was uranium and gold. that's why the British were doing deals. I don't think the Americans were in the early stages doing these deals, but they were brought in, I think, into the whole. Here's Martin Bormann. He's got all of the wonderful secrets that the Nazis developed over many years, plus all the cash from the whole of looted Europe. Oh, and by the way, I did do a kind of précis of a couple of the books, some of the other important books on this. The other one I forgot to tell you about was a book called Martin Bormann, Nazi in Exile. And that really follows on the Bormann story from the John Ainsworth Davis book, Op JB, from 96. That other book, Martin Bormann, Nazi in Exile, was published in 1983, I think, by a former top CBS journalist, and it was his kind of swan song, really. He had been a broadcaster in the war, and he'd been broadcasting from Britain to give them daily reports on CBS on the radio in the States about what had been going on in the war in Europe, right the way through the war. So he'd be a very familiar voice to every American during the Second World War. And so his book, Martin Bormann, Nazi in Exile, is one of the most important. He explains exactly what was going on with Bormann once he'd arrived in South America and Argentina. He was living on the various borders, so he could flip between one country and another very easily. And he was being very well protected. And, of course, after all this, you've got the creation of the State of Israel. And Nelson Rockefeller did a deal with the Israelis, with Ben-Gurion, the first Prime Minister, and he said, well, you can have the votes to get your new State of Israel, but you're not coming after any Nazi war criminals, are you? And that was the deal. So that was how Bormann was so protected, because there'd been this deal done between Nelson Rockefeller to get the State of Israel created with Ben-Gurion. So, there was the quid pro quo. So the Israelis basically sold out to these Nazi war criminals, and particularly to Bormann, who'd been the main one behind the final solution and the Holocaust of the Jews. And by the way, there's also the Zionists' involvement in all of this, because the Zionists had done deals with Hitler in 1933, the Havara Agreement, very well researched by Edwin Black, who did the IBM and the Holocaust book as well. Edwin's an amazing guy in the States. And, so you've got this agreement with the Zionists, which is, it basically broke the boycott. So there was a very powerful Jewish boycott of Nazi Germany in the 30s. And this agreement with the Zionists, between the Zionists and the Nazi Party, broke that boycott. And so loads of Jews were really annoyed with the Zionists, including a guy called Jacob Chaikin, who was their chief lawyer and chief strategist for the boycott in the USA. And his son, Anton Chaikin, started working for the LaRouche Group, and he's written various things about this, all of which are incredibly fascinating stuff. Anton is really, a bit of a genius in his own right, and he wrote, I think it was unofficial. He did some stuff with Webster Tarpley as well many years ago, but anyway, this is really important to understand, that it was the Zionists that broke the Jewish boycott. People just don't know this stuff. And so there was a sort of affinity between the Nazis and the Zionists, which meant that, maybe we won't come and pursue these Nazi war criminals, eh? And that deal gave them their state, the State of Israel, which was created in 1948. Very important, I think, to understand that these deals were done, which is why Bormann was not pursued, except by investigative journalists. There's quite a few that did it too. John Ware at the BBC was over there looking for Mengele, who was also over in Argentina. Loads of these people were protected there. Klaus Barbie is another one. I mean, there was a whole load of them in Argentina. Of course, which has got a large, particularly in Patagonia, a large German population in Argentina anyway. And so I think that, that's where the story ends really over there. And when Bormann finally died over there, a free man. But, there was also the Israeli kidnap of Eichmann in 1963, I think it was. And they kidnapped the guy, they found him and brought him back to Israel. But as Paul Manning, who wrote this Martin Bormann Nazi in Exile book, explains, when that happened, this had broken that agreement from 1948 between Ben-Gurion and Rockefeller not to go after the Nazi war criminals. So there was a very strong message went out that no more Eichmanns, okay? And in fact, Issa Harel, who was the Mossad boss, who went over to successfully kidnap Eichmann, retired very quickly afterwards, He was retired, basically. He didn't retire, he was sacked, because this had broken that previous agreement. So although Eichmann was hanged, the so-called, master of the final solution, he wasn't. Borman was, and Borman was left to freely pursue his life over in Paraguay and Argentina. So that's it in a nutshell, James.
Yeah. So do you know what much he actually got up to during that time after the war? Do people know what you got? Like, obviously. The guy's basically a bureaucrat, right? Remember, he's a bureaucrat gangster, and he's one of the masterminds of modern organised crime. So he's laundering vast sums of money. I mean, into these new companies he's created. Okay, the 750 companies. And that money has come largely laundered through. Okay, so remember, the Brits have got their hands on some of this, but Borman has still got most of it. And that money is all based in Switzerland. There's a brilliant bit in OpJB where he talks about the Swiss intelligence going and showing Ian Fleming a sort of big hole in a mountain, where all this wealth, German wealth, is stashed. Of course, the Swiss are a very peculiar lot. They had 2 world wars raging around them. They sit on their mountains and watch people killing each other and the money rolling in, So... do I recall HSBC having some gold as well, melting it down or something?
Well, they're hang on. Well, not really. The HSBC is Hong Kong, and they were founded on the opium trade. But anyway, I'm just trying to stick on this subject of the gold, and he's a bureaucrat, right? And that money from Switzerland was laundered through Sullivan and Cromwell's law firm in New York, which is the Dulles Brothers law firm. Remember, the Dulles Brothers are the Secretary of State, number one, and what was the other one? God. CIA chief after the war. Yeah. Okay, when the CIA was created. And so what you've got is the head of the State Department and the head of the CIA, their law firm is being used to launder all the Nazi loot after World War II by Martin Bormann, the chief architect of the Holocaust. So that's essentially what you're looking at in order to fund and fuel the Fourth Reich, the industrial Fourth Reich, and most of the detail of this is in Paul Manning's amazing Martin Bormann, Nazi in Exile, which I did a summary of that book, if anyone can't be bothered to read it, for Pippa Jones back in February 2016 on Talk Radio Europe. For 20 minutes, and I thought, oh, that was a good 20 minutes, and I put it onto a YouTube, and it went absolutely nuts back in the day where YouTube was demonetizing everybody and throttling. It was really one of the things that I think started YouTube on this disgusting, way of not being able to find things on searches, demonetizing all the best journalists on there, and so that was called What the BBC Won't Tell You About Brexit, and it went up, it went skyrocketed. I mean, I put it on in February 2016 before the Brexit vote, and by the Brexit vote we were up over 1.25 million hits just for my book review of Martin Bormann, Nazi in Exile. So you can probably find that out there somewhere if you don't want to read the book. But I mean, it's a terrific book to read. He was probably the greatest journalist of his generation. Another very important writer on all of this subject is a guy called William Stevenson, who wrote a book called The Borman Brotherhood. There's lots of books on this, but you'll only find 1 or 2 which are actually talking about the real stuff. In fact, when OpJB came out, and I'm not kidding, there was so much nonsense published by fake authors and fake writers. Well, I'm saying they were just paid to write rubbish, basically, and it was all published. And this is about the like Grey Wolf and all that, or about Hitler surviving and going to South America and doing this, that, and the other, and doing a rose garden and playing the tambourine with Andy Pandy or whatever he was supposed to be up to. But this is all a psychological operation to divert from JB, from the fact that you should keep your eyes on Borman, because he did survive the war. He probably shot Hitler dead in the Hitler bunker. No, never mind suicide. I mean, these people do not leave stuff to chance. They weren't going to allow Hitler to be captured by the Russians and tell the Russians all about what had been going on, or the rest of the world. I mean, Hitler by that time was a completely broken man. You know, he was on drugs, he was all sorts, you know. But Borman, and I mean, this is all described very well, I think, in in Op JB particularly. But there's been a whole load of absolute disinformation. I mean, most of the stuff, if you look up, do a search, say on Amazon or some other evil company, for anything to do with Borman, you'll find a whole load of books before you find The Borman Brotherhood by William Stevenson, out of print for many years, or you find Martin Bormann, Nazi in Exile. And by the way, Paul Manning, his son was shot dead after that book was published, and his publisher had his legs broken. So how's that? That was how angry they were. That was how angry the Nazis were about this. And Paul had a very honest attitude. He approached various Nazi groups and said, "Well, look, and Borman, would you want to chat? Talk to me, tell me what you're up to." But this is organised crime he's dealing with, and I think this is a large part of what we're dealing with today. Is a very secretive
Tony,
occult.
In what aspect do you see it in as like the World Economic Forum with this Great Reset? Do you think that's like like how you say?
Well, okay. So what we're dealing with here is really a cult. Okay, whether it's a death cult or what, I have no idea. But these people certainly don't want anyone to know the degree to which they are working to the same plans. And if you will not get onto the board or onto the executives of any of these companies, because it's only people who are in the cult who are in those massive companies now, these massive monopolistic firms. And I don't really want to name any of them. I mean, I would suggest probably Siemens is one. I mean, they were, they were doing all sorts of dodgy stuff right the way through the war as well. But what they've done is they've specifically aimed at powerful big business to monopolise it. Now, if you look at what's going on right now with these lockdowns, etc., and the shutting of the shops, this is about monopoly power. There's been decisions now made apparently about electric cars. Elon Musk has quadrupled his net worth overnight, because of this decision. These people are actually controlling not only the monopoly of massive industries and the banking system like Peter Thiel and PayPal, etc., they are controlling the policy as well as the businesses that those policies are gratifying. So we're moving very, very far away from any sort of real democracy, and the only thing that can be a limit on that is the media. As I saw with Duncan Campbell back in the 1980s, he was able to, puncture the pomposity of the Thatcher era with this stuff saying, well, look at all this, what do these people think they're up to? Then this is a democracy. His Secret Society series was looking at ways in which the public had been being bamboozled, and yet he was seen as a problem. The Director General, Alistair Milne, in 1987, was sacked for backing his programmes. Sacked, by the way, in 87. I mean, he was the last really good Director General the BBC ever had. We've now got a guy called Tim Davie, who's a marketing executive from Pepsi. So it's not surprising the BBC. I mean, it's a sabotage of the BBC. It's tragic for me to see the organisation and the people I work with having to suffer the disgusting propaganda, Orwellian nonsense that the corporation is churning out in London now. I mean, it's a lot better in the regions, but around the country. But even there, of course, this is why the BBC is now cutting back staff and journalists in the regions and telling them they've got to do horoscopes and things, and all this dumbing down, trying to turn us into a bunch of idiots. And only Murdoch at Talk Radio and Fox News seem to be doing anything worthwhile, which I never thought I'd say that. Being a bit of a veteran of the campaigns around Wapping, and seeing Rupert Murdoch destroy the trade union movement in the print unions in Britain and breaking up the very, very good relationship. Because, people don't realise this, but back in the 1970s, journalists and printers had an absolute control over what was printed. The editor was much more hands-off, and a journalist, if he wrote a story, typed it up, before it was actually typeset onto the hot metal, would go downstairs to the print room with the printer, and the journalist would look at his article in the metal, and he'd have to read it backwards, and then he'd sign it off with the printer. The editor didn't get involved, right? So
I didn't know that.
That's right.
This is the thing, Tony. A lot of people wouldn't have known that. That would have took
well, that's right. And look what happened. They brought it up. What Murdoch did is he brought in all this desktop publishing style stuff, which everyone then adopted. And, journalists are working from home and they never get out anymore. There's never enough money to pay the journalists, blah, blah. And so the mad thing about all this, right, was that the print deadlines have gone not forward, but back. So in other words, you've got to submit your story earlier now than you had to using hot metal in the 70s, right? So people do not realise this. And why that is because the subs demand more and more time in order to typeset your article in their desktop published system and shuffle it around and maybe, sub it down a little bit or, And so and of course in that process the editor's sitting there and he's saying, get rid of this, get rid of that. Now, before the desktop publishing and Murdoch, that could never happen because the article was printed by agreement between not an editor and a journalist, but between a printer and a journalist. Yeah? And I remember hearing about, this is on the 7/7, talking to Mark Honningsbaum. He was working for The Guardian on 7/7, the London bombings. And this was about the idea of bombs being under the trains, right? Now, he actually said in a podcast on 7/7 itself, he did a podcast from the scene saying that the various people had told him the bombs were under the trains, right? And that was on 7/7. That's a recording which is still out there somewhere. And then I saw in the next day's paper, in fact, I went back a few months later and saw, hang on, he wrote an article in the next day's paper where it said the bombs were inside the trains. So I spoke to Mark. I phoned him up at The Guardian. I said, Mark, what's this as an anomaly here? You're saying on the Tuesday, whatever it was, that the bombs are under the trains, and then in your article you say it's on top of the trains, in the train. And there's this long pause, right? And he said, well, Tony, not everything I submit as copy ends up in the next day's paper. So there you go. This is Orwell's 1984 perception management going on. So I got into this business because I believe the public have a right to know what's going on, and if they don't know what's going on, then there'll be tyranny. Yeah. And having worked in London, I took 7/7 quite personally, actually, and to see all the problems with it. I've got an article out there somewhere. I'm not sure where it is these days. It's in my other book, which is The Siege of Heaven. And that is called, what is it? I think it's 10 years on. 7/7 bombings, 10 years on. It's meant a loss of freedoms and liberties. But do we know what really happened that day? And in that, I go into a pretty comprehensive takedown of the official story and an explanation of this being a bomb attack by former military. Serving Israeli military on the London Underground and the bus in order to, make the terror real, I suppose, the war on terror, to get everyone behind the idea that we have to go and invade Iraq and, do all these things in the Middle East. And a load of Londoners are slaughtered in order to get a specific narrative going that, we've got all these dirty Arabs and nasty Muslims, and really, look, you have to look at this from a spiritual and a religious perspective. The attack on the Jews, the attack on the Jews, right, in the Second World War, wasn't really an attack on the Zionists, right? So the Zionists were shipped over from Germany and parts of Europe over to. Because they'd done this agreement, they'd broken the boycott. But the rabbinic tradition, who didn't believe in this whole idea of going to Israel, mostly Orthodox Jews and people who were just racially Jewish, but thought, well, this isn't really what the Bible's about. They were exterminated, right? So the rabbinic tradition across Europe was destroyed over those years. And, I think what we're looking at since then, really since 2000 or so, maybe a bit before that with Bosnia and the Bosnian Muslims, is Operation Cyclone in the 1980s in Afghanistan. The American CIA infiltrated into there, and they created this private army of jihadis, so-called jihadis, to fight the Russians. Those jihadis then became a massive army of paid mercenaries, and they went over to Bosnia, and then they've been over to, Libya, Iraq. They've been used all over the place, and ISIS. And Dilyana Gatasheva, this Bulgarian journalist, brilliant Bulgarian investigative journalist, has actually traced all the weapons that were going to ISIS, had American end-user certificates. So they were coming from Eastern Europe and being flown over to Syria and given to the ISIS guys by this clandestine route. I think it was Armenian Airways or something. I can't remember the name of the airline. But Dilyana's work, and she, of course, did that brilliant work for Bulgarian TV, and the next day she was sacked for uncovering this, disgusting, basically the NATO support for ISIS. And Al-Qaeda obviously created by them. I mean, Bin Laden, the rest of them. This is the same. They're doing the same to the Muslims as the Nazis did to the Jews. The idea is here, we just create a reason to, hate. Everyone should hate them because they're killing your kids. Another thing we didn't really touch on there. That's the same tradition basically. They're going for the monotheistic faiths, so they won't go for the Christian Zionists. They'll go for people like me, who are honest Christians. So at least, there are other aspects to this which touch on this spiritual side of it. But, I think that Operation Gladio, which was going on in the 1980s mainly in Europe, this really was a Nazi operation by NATO. And it shouldn't come as such a surprise, as several senior NATO commanders were actually generals in the Nazi armed forces. So they went on after a few years, no one noticed, and they become Supreme Commander of NATO. As Peter Carrington did, of course, as well, from the Arnhem, Nijmegen Bridge scenario. So, there is this definite, there's a definite connection between all these. I think a fascinating jigsaw puzzle, really, that's being done here. And it's not just me doing it. Like I said, there's loads of other people. But look, the Gladio operation, I don't know how much you know about it, but it was really it was a NATO intelligence op. A particularly nasty, sophisticated one, because they were worried that the Italians and other countries were getting quite communist. And so what they did is they blew up various parts of Europe, and blamed it on these pro-Russian groups, okay? Now, look, that was, they were killing police, they were doing all sorts of stuff, and saying, oh, look, the communists, the Russians are coming, so everyone starts to hate the Russians. Now, Operation Gladio was taken exactly from the book of the Nazi SS werewolf units, actually, at the end of the Second World War. Stay-behinds, they're called. So the idea is these werewolf units, as the Allies advanced, would hide in little tunnels or whatever, and then pop up a few days later and start sabotaging from behind the lines. So that's exactly the model that the Gladio units were. The only thing was they're killing Europeans. This is NATO killing Europeans. I'm trying to blame it on the Russians. So after 2000, that all changed to killing Europeans or killing Americans on 9/11 and blaming it on the Muslims. So it was what you might call Gladio 2. I think Sybil Edmonds, the former FBI woman, as that's what she's coined it as. So that, I think, is what we're looking at now, is we've got completely maniac, rogue intelligence people, obviously not all of them, but we've got these secret networks. I think, isn't it called a Club de Bern or Pinay Circle of retired intelligence people? These people are responsible for this stuff. And, if a bomb goes off in London tomorrow, I would assume it's, they'll blame it on, I don't know, whoever they want to blame it on, but I would assume that it's our own intelligence services who are trying to disrupt and destroy things. And, obviously, if you're a senior politician or military person in this country, you've got to be very careful of trying to act against these people, because they'll take you out. Look what they did to John F. Kennedy. That was in 1963, that was a very clear sign to everybody, wasn't it? Look, if you start, trying to shut down the CIA, then this is what's going to happen to you, boys and girls. A very, very clear signal, as Bill Hicks pointed out, the comedian. Yeah, so
it's so public as well.
Yeah, you're going to be. And interestingly, this is another little bit of the jigsaw. Is the Kennedy assassination? And I really suggest your viewers will check out a guy called James Files. He was the guy that shot Kennedy, blew his back of his head off, and he used a Remington Fireball, which was an experimental rifle at the time, which he had access to as a Chicago mob hitman. He was down in Dallas with Johnny Roselli, Charles Nicoletti, and other people of the top of the Chicago. It's like Al Capone, the Chicago mob, and that was their job. That was their job, to kill Kennedy that day. The Daltech building is where Rossetti and Nicoletti were, and they were firing from behind, and you can see that they miss, and then James Files was the guy who was designed there to, if they didn't kill him, that he was going to, the finals. He was a sharpshooter, crack shot. And an interesting it's a brilliant talk by him, recorded, I'm not sure if it was by Wim Dankbar or somebody. Files on JFK's the video or the book, and that is absolutely amazing to listen to. 2 hours of him taking you through the whole thing. I mean, it's clearly obvious that he did it, but the most miraculous thing is about all of this is that there are 3 attempts to kill Files after this, right? So obviously the CIA and the government do not want this ex-hitman, who's killed Kennedy, going around talking, right? So part of the deal is they're going to have to kill him. But the thing is, he was a sharpshooter in Korea, and he's been in live firefights in war, right? So he was prepared at all times for any attempts on his life, and he always carried loaded firearms with him around, as you've got to do if you're in the Chicago mob and you're one of their hitmen. So there are 3 attempts he describes on his life, various attempts, where there's a bullet fired, misses him, but he's rolled over, grabbed a gun, starts firing back straight away, and he's not the easiest guy in the world to kill. Even if you're you're an undercover cop or whatever, you've been told just go and kill this guy. Don't worry about it, and no questions will be asked. So the deep state, very much in the driving seat. But at the end of the day, on a spiritual note, maybe we can, sort of start winding up and talking about the spiritual stuff, because they're on a hiding to nothing, James. This is the interesting side of this. They're really, they think they're in control. They think they're running things. Putin and the Russians are a third force, which they did not want to be there, right? So they would expect at this point to be controlling Russia, the capitalists, and to have China as their opposition, right? But in 2000, Putin turned the tables on them. Berezovsky was the oligarch who was in the process of selling off and raping Russia and selling off to his mates all their resources. And Putin phoned him up one morning. He was his puppet president, he thought, and said, "Look, I'm sorry, but they're coming to arrest you in the morning, Boris. You better get out of the country tonight, and I'll do what I can to make sure there's no proper prosecution, but they are determined to go for you, and I can't stop them." Well, of course, Boris is a frenzy. Berezovsky there. He was the main oligarch. He ran the first big private NTV company in Russia. And he had the Mercedes franchise and God knows how many other franchises. He'd sold off Aeroflot and God knows what else. And so he got on a plane to London. And that was how Putin took back control of Russia. The oligarchs were booted out. The top oligarch. And, of course, Putin made sure that any of the other oligarchs, including people like Khodorkovsky, who started getting ideas above their station, like they were running the country, were booted out. So he's, I'm not saying he's not a gangster, but he's, Putin has made sure that all the oligarchs in Russia these very wealthy, powerful gangsters know that they can do what they want, they can make their money, but don't start effing with the Kremlin, right? You start messing with us, you're going down. So that's the way he's running things. And, that's, I think, the way that any self-respecting... I can't see Boris behaving like that. And by the way, popularity ratings in Russia are genuinely massive. So you've got this Third World War they're trying to create now between Israel and Iran. That would be particularly nasty because it will drag in. Who will it drag in? Well, the Russians and the Americans are already down there, aren't they? You know, so it could drag those two in very quickly. But then after a while, the Chinese would come in on the side of the Russians. So this is a particularly nasty war we've got potentially coming towards us, right? We've got Netanyahu in court this week, for corruption, right? So that's how Israel is in an absolute meltdown. So God knows where that's going to go. It's probably being run by the army right now. So that potential war coming down the road is they're going to lose it, and they're going to lose it probably because what they want to do is they've set up over the years, I think, the same people controlling China and the West, and this is evidenced by the way that these Chinese surveillance and social credit stuff is now kind of coming in here in the West. There's an attempt to bring it in by Gates and the rest, right? But the Russians are a third force. They're playing their hand, I think, masterfully. And they are the main reason why we're having all this anti-Putin stuff all the time. Oh, no, Putin's terrible, blah, blah. And the other thing is, I had a chat with one of the investigators on the child sexual abuse. I can't remember the guy's name right now, but he said to me, the Russians have got everything. Yeah, on the child sexual abuse in the Tory party and in the establishment, the Home Office, etc. They know who all the people were abusing kids. And they haven't said anything about it because they're waiting in case they need to. And this is one of the reasons I think the British establishment are so afraid of Russia. They hate Russia so much. The KGB were doing their job very well in the 70s and 80s during the Cold War, keeping real tabs on all the dodgy people in high positions in London. And so, anyway, sorry, you tried to interrupt me there, but
is that why we're seeing the Pope going to Iraq? And because the Pope is, I was just reading last week. He's never gone to Iraq ever before.
Well, it's a great idea for him to go there. It's fantastic. I mean, there's a lot of people talk about conspiracies of the Jesuits and God knows. Look, the Jesuits were superseded in the 18th century by the Illuminati. In case you don't know, the Illuminati took over from them. The idea that the Jesuits are still a really powerful force. No, of course, there's an occultic side of the Vatican. Of course there is. The only real original church is the Orthodox Church, the Greek and the Russian Orthodox Church, and the other Orthodox churches. Yeah. And also, there are various of the more original Christian churches, but the Roman Church started the Crusades and had a split with the Eastern Church, tried to destroy Constantinople, which was where the church had really started. It was a very important part of the early church. In 1154, the Great Schism, where the church is split, right? And then in the mid-1500s, we had the Protestants, okay, so the dissolution of the monastery. So there was another split from the early church, right, the earliest church. The Roman Catholics split off to begin with. Then we had another split with the Masons, by the way. This is a Mason-friendly church. The Catholics never were. I don't know if they are today. They probably are, but the Masonic church, which is the Protestant church, I mean, you don't need to be a genius to work out that they were not, see all those monastery ruins all across the country from the mid-1500s. Then we had the English Civil War in the mid-1600s, which was really the merchant classes and the Freemasons at the worst end of Masonry taking over the country, killing the king, and making sure that the country is run for the benefit of the City of London and the merchants. And that was the fuel for the British Empire, the Industrial Revolution, kicking everybody off the land so they had to go and work in factories in Britain, the enclosures. So that, I think, is, if you understand that's why we had an Industrial Revolution. What did the Industrial Revolution give us? Well, it gave us an empire. It got us to the stage in the late 1900s where Cecil Rhodes and his chums, Milner and the rest of them, were looking around the world going, well, we control the world now, and why don't we just take over the world? We could take over the world. And so they were getting to the point where they believed they could. Maybe they could have done. But you know what they did is they ditched any kind of pretense of Christianity as well, so they were doing it for the wrong reasons. And so that was, I think, what started happening then was, I mean, there was his famous will. What he did is he created these round table groups, which led to the Council on Foreign Relations, but first the Royal Institute for International Affairs in St James, which is, by the way, where the Masonic plot was hatched to kill Charles II, in 1648 in the English Civil War, the same part. Round St James is very interesting. Loads goes on round there. It's just off Pall Mall, near Piccadilly Circus, around where these big London clubs are, and so around that area, that's where all this stuff goes on. I think over the years. So I mean, that's that in a nutshell. I think that's what we've got. We've got these roundtable groups. The Royal Institute for International Affairs, Chatham House, is basically a private think tank that all but runs British foreign policy. Now, I don't know how, right every second they're better funded than the Foreign Office in terms of research and what they know is going on. Their intelligence networks far better. And those is basically a privatisation of everything, So that's where we are now. They've decided to have these 3 world wars through the Scottish Rite Mason Albert Pike, who decided that this was going to be a good idea. The First World War to take the Holy Land off the Ottoman Empire. The Second World War to create the situation where they could create the State of Israel and get the load of Jews to go over there, fleeing Nazi Germany, etc. And the Third World War will be the one I've described between Israel and Iran, and bringing in all these major superpowers, from all around the world. I mean, it's going to be a very difficult war to stay out of. So.
Can you just elaborate? That's kind of a scary prospect, having another war. It wouldn't be nuclear, would it? It wouldn't go that far, would they?
Well, they might well do. I mean, we're now in the situation. We just had some changes in the British nuclear use policy, actually, over the last few weeks, which I hardly noticed. Remember, the Russians have just withdrawn their ambassador to Washington. That was hardly even in the news. That's how rubbish our, news editors and managers, etc. are. So we're getting closer to it. That's a real. I mean, the Russians have got their hypersonic, God knows what missiles now, so they're going to be able to defend themselves if they're attacked, of course. And they're getting ready for it. They're ready for it. He's prepared. Putin has prepared his country to fight the next world war. He's ready now. He's basically saying, "Come on!" And of course, the guy's a judo player. But will it go nuclear? I mean, what I would imagine will happen is you'll get some sort of, false flag nuclear weapon. So there are lots of these, by the way, hanging around. Lost nuclear weapons. Well, I don't know what there is. There is a word for it. I'm not quite sure what it is. It's a sort of military term for these, that missing nukes or unaccounted for nukes. And by the way, Roger Kirk, bless him, the investigative journalist who I interviewed a few years ago about this, he talks about, he did a program in the late 90s about it wasn't about nuclear weapons, it was about arms, being able to buy arms cheaply from the 1990s Soviet Union, which was in a state of collapse where the army hadn't been paid. He was out in Ukraine or somewhere at some base where these soldiers hadn't been paid for months, and they were just bribing them. Can we have these weapons? Yeah, off you go. Thanks very much for the money, And just as he was about to finish, they got some bit about. That's right. They got hold of some weapons-grade plutonium, and they got it tested. Amazingly, I mean, this is the nuclear bomb for you. Weapons-grade plutonium. They got it tested and confirmed, but they came back to the hotel room, and the film, the camera, and the sound recorder the microphone hadn't been on, so they'd had all this secret filming of these arms dealers in Russia or Ukraine, and they didn't. So they had to go back for another final take, because they hadn't actually got the recording. Anyway, in the final recording, they were offered an SS-20 missile, 1,500 miles range, 3 nuclear warheads, and they actually showed it to them round the back of this warehouse and lifted the tarpaulin up, and there it was. Now that program went out in the 1990s, but it was destroyed. So if anyone's got it on their VCR, stick it up on YouTube, please. Share it around the world. Because that's a very perfect opportunity for any country that needs nuclear weapons, like Iran, for example, to get hold of. Roger Cook can get an SS-20 from the Russian military in 1998, whatever it was, then I'm sure these other countries would have got them on the black market.
Yeah.
So a false flag, I would say, something like that, a nuke going off, and everyone and the wrong people are blamed for it. I would guess that's the way they're playing these sorts of things.
And do you think this is just to literally bring in this Orwellian world? What's coming? This dystopian? It's because I feel lost, and I think a lot of our people inside my group feel lost. To be honest, Tony, in some ways.
Well, I just think people have got to be realistic about it. First of all, is don't kid yourself, and just be strong. I think you've got to have, you've got to have. I think faith. Personally, my faith is basic, normal Christian. I'm a Quaker, but I'm not expecting to survive it all, right? But all I say is, if you read the Book of Revelation, if you read the Bible, etc., it's better than Nostradamus by far, and you will find it. By the way, that's a phrase coined from Barry Smith, who's a fantastic New Zealand preacher who died sadly about 10 years ago, but he's done a load of work on all this, and you'll find some of his old videos out there, I'm sure. But better than Nostradamus is they lose, yeah? They lose. They just don't. They haven't got the. They try, and they lose, and that's it basically. So the evil is wiped from the earth finally. Thank God. And most of the problem of this in all this is secret societies. It's those oaths they swear. It's the rituals they do, and what they basically do, James, is everybody who wants to get their way up through the society has got to do some sort of selfish evil deed to screw somebody's life up, who's a good person, who's in the way, and then they get promoted in the organisation, and that's how these secret societies operate. The mafia, basically, it's an international mafia of organised crime.
It just makes me feel sick.
Well, I'm sure, look, but all I'm saying is, at the end of the day, they lose. So don't lose sight of that, yeah? And keep your courage, stiff upper lip and all that, and, work with people who understand you. Obviously be very suspicious about spies. A lot of them around, infiltrating organisations, trying to fracture groups, split groups of, people who get on well together. Steal things, whatever, important information. There's a fantastic amount of that sort of thing out there. But we're living in this kind of Twilight spy world, really, where, you've got to be quite careful who you trust. And, the most easiest person to trust in that sort of situation is obviously your nearest and dearest and, yourself and God. At the end of the day, we're all connected because we're all interested in and we have a love of the truth. And that, for me, is the most important thing. We want, we want the very best for our kids. These people don't. They just want to control. And basically, they are godless control freaks. So, obviously, by not being a control freak and by understanding that, we're here for a purpose, you're separating yourself from them, so have nothing to do with them. Obviously, the church has been pretty appalling in all this. I think, generally speaking, they should be fighting back, but they're not. By the way, President Xi is like the Pope. Yeah, he's worse than the Pope because if you criticise him, you go to jail in China. This is why he's going for the Uyghurs in the west of China and putting them in these internment camps, re-education camps they call them, don't they? Is because they're Muslims. They don't believe in him. They believe in Allah. It's as simple as that. So people in the West are quite prepared to have a go at the Americans for, nobbling the Muslims around the world, which they have done. It's been absolutely disgusting, appalling, millions of them. But they won't have a go at the Chinese. A lot of the lefties won't have a go at the Chinese for doing the same thing to the Muslims in Xinjiang. So, this is the mad thing about religion, isn't it? That, if you like the Chinese have said we don't want religion, but they've got it. President Xi is their guru.
Yeah, I've been trying to study the King James Bible myself. I'm not religious, Tony, and I'm trying to understand it myself. I watch a guy called Brian Dingler on YouTube, and he just does like little sermons about the book, and I totally, it blows my mind because King James, wasn't it, who wrote the King James James Bible.
Well, he ordered it to be translated for the first time. Well, William Tyndall, 100 years before, had translated it, but it wasn't such a brilliant translation, so he ordered a proper translation. And not long after, there was a civil war, and the City of London took over the country. You know, they weren't happy about that. So it's yeah. I mean, Revelation is a good place to start. It's absolute mind-blowing stuff, really. And you know, I went to Patmos, the island.
Rapture.
Well, no rapture. Get rid of that. That's rubbish. That's the Schofield Bible. This is the Christian Zionist stuff you're getting into there. Well, look, the rapture is nonsense, right? It's just made up by Cyrus Schofield and his chums in America, who are a bunch of criminals who had a lot of money and had their own Bible printed, which had all this nonsense in there. I mean, you know, there's all sorts of, you know, you can. It's a whole area to explore, and it's fascinating. But the Book of Revelation is a really good place to start. Like I said, I went over to Patmos years ago. I was just on a holiday in Greece, and it's the most amazing place where John, the Apostle John, had his revelation. He was the oldest, he was the last of the apostles who was left, and he'd been exiled out there by the Romans. I mean, you know, the Romans were pretty bad, but they weren't, you know, quite terribly bad. I think they felt a little bit guilty. They didn't want to kill the guy. Let's just get rid of him out there where he's not causing trouble, and, you know, saying that the emperor is not as good as we think he is. And anyway, so on Patmos he had this whole revelation, and he had his little servant Procurus who was sitting there scribbling it all down as he was saying it all, you know. And you can still go to the little chapel on Patmos where this all happened. They've got a little chapel there. Well, it didn't happen there, but it was right next to it, and they've got a little shrine to it all. So, you know, it's an amazing vision. It's, yeah, like I say, better than Nostradamus, and it gives, you know, if there was a loving God out there, I know you don't believe it, but if there was, I want
to say, Tony, it's not that, it's that. What I'm trying to learn, because it's something I've never learned about. I've never actually.
Well, you don't get taught it. You don't get taught it because they control the education, right? But you know, if there was a loving God out there, don't you think he would want to leave a little warning for his people about what was going to happen? I mean, he was obviously, he's outside time, so he can see what's going to happen in the future, and he's saying to John, who, by the way, was the disciple that Jesus loved the most, and it actually says that in the New Testament. To John, he gave this important little bit of information, which is, this is what's going to transpire in the future. So as and when all these things start to happen, you know it's part of the plan. Don't be afraid. Yeah, and by the way, I'm with you. Even if you die, I'm with you, right? So this is an important message. It's a really important message, I think. The key thing in there is the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, because they are the white horse, the red horse, the black horse, and the pale horse, right? So that's all in there, in the Revelation. The white horse, seems pretty clear to me, is the Antichrist. So someone appears as a world leader, like a kind of smooth-talking Hitler character, who all the media think he's great, and everyone thinks he's lovely, which Tim Cohen thinks is going to be Prince Charles. Tim Cohen, the author of The Antichrist and a Cup of Tea. He's a Jewish American guy who's converted to Christianity, and The Antichrist and a Cup of Tea is a fascinating read. I'm not saying he's correct. All right, all I'm saying is that it's difficult to, you know, refute it biblically. So that's the white horse. Then you've got the red horse, which is war. So there'll be a war. Then there'll be a complete financial collapse, which is the black horse, and finally famine, death, and plagues, that sort of thing. Which is and that is the sign that it's all starting. Now, that's the beginning of the real beginning of the end. And when all this pandemic stuff happened this time last year, last Easter, it didn't take me long to realise, look, this is the beginning of the end. It really is. I think it's a global scamdemic. It's a global scam on everybody. And there's so many lies, there's so many murders being committed by these hideous protocols they've imposed on people in the health service. So if you lose one of your loved ones and they go into hospital, it's quite possible that a enlightened doctor outside hospital would be able to treat them and cure them. Whereas once they're in hospital, they're in the little pipeline, and they may never come out of it. You know, so you're not even allowed to see them in hospital. You know, ivermectin and chloroquine are, if you get it at an early stage, are likely to... it gives your body the time to build up the immune system defences to kill off SARS-CoV-2, right? So there's something like 90% better rate of cure if you get ivermectin or chloroquine, particularly ivermectin, in the early stages of, I have a friend, actually, who he popped out one chloroquine pill. He felt the effects of COVID coming on, short breath, yeah? So that's the first feeling, right? And he popped one of these chloroquine pills. In half an hour, all the symptoms had gone. Now, this is what we're supposed to believe if Channel 4 News and these hideous, murderous journalists, right? Oh, look, silly Donald Trump. He thinks chloroquine can help. Ha, 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 ha. What a fool. You're just lying, aren't you? You're lying and lying and lying, so more people will die. So this is more and more of a scamdemic, plandemic, right? So there's that. There's also the complete failure to get people to take vitamin D, which is another really useful, and zinc. Now, I would suggest vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc, and omega fish oil. In fact, one of my friends who's not very healthy, I was speaking to him a few weeks ago, and he said, I've never felt better. I've taken it every day. I feel fantastic. And, of course, your body is ready and waiting for this bloody virus to turn up. And when it does turn up, it goes boof, and it punches it in the face, and you never see it again. Listen, the other thing, okay, from a scientific point, I've learned a lot about this, speaking to some of these amazing, beautiful doctors who have been silenced and censored. A fantastic amount. One of the things is, look, now, I'm speaking to you from Gloucestershire, right, which is just near a town called Berkeley on the River Severn, which is where Edward Jenner lived, and he invented the vaccine using cowpox to cure smallpox, right? So what do you use to cure SARS-CoV-2? What do you use? You use the same thing, ivermectin, as you used to cure SARS-CoV-1 back in 2004, which was the prescribed treatment, but you're not allowed to use that for SARS-CoV-2. Why not? Because it actually cures you, and they don't want you cured. They want you to die, particularly if you're an old Brexit voter. They love those dying. They love that. But the other thing is just really, really good is to catch the common cold coronavirus, right? So this is a type of common cold which you'll sneeze a bit and whatever for a few days and you'll be fine, but then you're cured. You're prepared. Your body. This is a real vaccine, right? Because it's exactly like cowpox and smallpox. When SARS-CoV-2 comes along, you've already had a coronavirus, which is 90% or whatever similar to this, and so your body's going, oh, it's similar to this thing. Ah, we know what you look like, and you're able to deal with it because you're immune. Now, when this first happened, we were told by all these, Bill Gates sponsored killer scientists that, we have got no immunity. Well, you do, actually, because everyone that's had a coronavirus common cold in the last 10, 15, 20 years is got a large amount of immunity to SARS-CoV-2. So that would be a real vaccine. Why on earth did they not give the whole country the whole country, the coronavirus, I think it's called beta coronavirus, which is the common cold version. Then you've got a massive amount of immunity. You don't need to be a genius to work this out, but you do have to have the time and know where to look, and you need to be able to talk to some of the top doctors, as I've, amazingly been able to do. Talking particularly to Dr. Michael Yeadon recently, as I did, and to hear from him some of this stuff, So, he's also convinced, by the way, that nobody who's healthy and under 60 should touch the vaccine. And
is that he categorically said nobody under 60
needs to? No. Why would you vaccinate somebody who isn't at danger of dying of something? You just don't do it. You don't do it. And the other thing is that you certainly shouldn't be, doing kids. I mean, God's sake. And the other thing is you should not have the vaccine if you've already had COVID either, because you've got natural immunity. What the vaccine is supposedly trying to do is to prepare you in case you get it. Well, you've already got it, so you've got the antibodies, you've got the T cells. So why do you need a frigging vaccine? You don't. But they're trying to force this down. They're trying to force this down people's throats. There's a hard sell. The pharmaceutical lobby is writing our news bulletins. day after day after day after day, and it's so obvious, the bias now. We even had a joke today, I was listening on the radio, Boris Johnson said, please people, please trust the vaccine. You know, now, this is desperation. There's obviously a lot of people out there who are not having it.
Yeah. I just wanted to ask, like, because obviously they said that the vaccine just stops you getting iller if you do catch it. So it doesn't do any, like, it doesn't stop you passing it or even catching it. Could that be a sign of they could release another bioweapon?
Well, of course they could do that, and this, by the way, is a bioweapon. It was created by Dr. Peter Daszak, as Steve Hilton has, you know, pretty much, you know, made absolutely straight, understood.
To catch something else and not be as sick, because they're thinking about if the people get too out of control. And so,
well, look, this is another thing. Why this pandemic now? Okay, why now? Okay, first of all, Brexit. Okay, so this is a major screw up of their plans to have a United States of Europe. Right, it's the biggest problem they've had. Right, they've never had anything this bad. Loads of other countries are looking at the Brits with envy. I think the other reason is they've also hit a brick wall in Syria as well. On the road to Damascus, they were turned back, right? Just like Paul in the Bible.
Yeah.
And so those are the two, I think, main reasons why we're having this all happen now. So, I mean, that for me is, you know, if you understand it in that context, you can see there is a reason for this sort of an operation to take place, James. What do you agree with that? You think that's maybe something to do with the timing? What do you think?
To be honest, I just feel like they've had enough of us, to be honest. Like, they've taken all our freedoms, that's it. It's just everything what's being put into place is to hurt us. And that's all I can see. And as a normal person, I just keep thinking, right, they're vaccinating so many people, and they say, oh, it just makes me feel like, well, what about if they did release something again, and it was a lot stronger or worse? And me just walking around casually, Tony, just, you know what I mean, could end up catching this, and people who have been vaccinated now have got a little bit more protection because they knew this.
Well, I don't think they've got that much more protection against something new. By the way, the new variants is a load of rubbish. Yeah, the British variant is not British. It's just it was discovered first here. One of the things that one of the doctors I've been speaking to said is that these variants, what happens as the original virus starts to run out of steam, it mutates in a similar point on the virus in different places at the same time. So these different variants don't have to be actually spreading around the world. It goes sort of click and changes in different parts of the world at the same time, because that's the most likely place on the virus to mutate. And you know, this is not being you know, put out there, is it, in the press? How to deal with this? How to understand it? Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely a depopulation agenda. I see Mike Yeadon on the Delling Pollcast the other day. He's finally come round to saying openly, well, I think that this is an attempt, some sort of an attempt at depopulation of some kind. You know, and I think he's well. I mean, look at Gates has been involved in eugenics. Loads and loads of people connected with all of this are eugenicists. I mean, look at that. There's an amazing article about Bill Gates and his Messiah complex, written by Robert Kennedy from the States, the US, you know, the Democrat senator, and he explains there that he's been experimenting. Gates has been experimenting for years with these vaccines on poor Africans and poor Asians, you know, causing absolute mayhem. And you know, oh, my vaccines are so wonderful. No, they're killing people. And by the way, you know, Bill, don't you, that when you had one of these vaccine programs in Africa and various places you do it, you have a massive budget, like 60% of the budget isn't for the vaccine at all, or to pay the people working on it, or, you know, giving the injections. It's to bribe the officials not to prosecute when there's a prosecution, possibly even to get, you know, lawyers killed. And all the money that goes into stopping, say, for example, paying the best lawyers to fight a lawsuit if it does happen, bribing politicians, bribing media to give you positive media. So most of the money in these programs Gates has been doing has been bribery. This is what I mean about organised crime and the Fourth Reich. That's how it operates. Bill Gates had a monopoly on Microsoft, didn't he? And, on all our computers and now Google has got Android. They were fighting each other in the courts for a while, but about 4 or 5 years ago they decided to shake hands and we're never going to fight again because we're part of an oligopoly and we're going to work together, divide everything up between us. So there's no real competition in these massive monopolistic industries. And with the Bilderberg stuff that we touched on a little bit, it's quite obvious to me that they have now finished their job. They've got all of their puppet politicians in place around the Western world in the NATO countries. They're preparing for this lovely little war where they'll be sitting in the bunker with the Chinese, and they're preparing the ground in the West by having this pandemic and by making it impossible for people to travel. And I don't think most of the politicians are really up to speed with this. Certainly, most of the journalists aren't. I'm probably one of the few people in the world that's understood the way the Bilderbergs have operated. They had cancelled their conference last year. It is a Nazi organisation. In 1954, their first chairman for the first 20 years was Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, who was one of the chief saboteurs of the Market Garden operation I was talking about earlier. And Prince Bernhard, what he did there was he sent a spy in to the Abwehr. He was supposed to be. There's pictures of him helping plan the mission before it happened with Montgomery and Horrocks, who was the army chief on the ground, and obviously Montgomery was the main army commander at the time, and there's pictures of Bernhard peering over his shoulder. Well, anyway, he sent an agent in to the Abwehr a few days before Market Garden happened to Eindhoven to tell them all everything. And that guy was nearly nabbed by an intelligence agent, but he was whisked away. And he made sure that the Germans knew that we were coming. So there were all sorts of ways they sabotaged that operation. They didn't want it to succeed. But the Bilderbergs, who started it, as I said, 10 years after the battle in Arnhem, were chaired by Prince Bernhard. And Bernhard just sums up just exactly what these people are all about. He was a German prince. He'd been in the SS at the beginning of the war. He married into the Dutch royal family, and then he skipped over to Britain and made out that, I'm on your side now. I'm not a Nazi after all, And this is the pattern in that particular battle that has led to that creation of that Nazi organisation. Effectively, they were NATO's political lobby, making sure that the Fourth Reich got all their politicians in place throughout the 1960s, 70s and 80s. Well, I would say probably 70s and 80s is when they really started to take over. People like Blair, etc., and Major and the rest, and everyone pretty much since, I think. It was interesting, wasn't it, when Corbyn, what happened to him? God almighty, he was a bit weak. He didn't deal with the Brexit business, he didn't deal with the anti-Semitism, but he had a heart of gold. And he was the last chance that the left had in Britain to have a decent leader of the Labour Party since Harold Wilson, who was bumped out by MI5 and, the oligarchy and the Bilderbergers back in the 1970s. I just think it's important to understand that the politics has been controlled by the Bilderbergs for a long, long time. They're basically part of the sort of privatisation side, so they want a very small, weak government, and, they want the sort of people that will be working effectively for NATO, pro-war. Look at all the pro-war Labour people that are still around, in the Labour Party. Some of them voted for the war. The Lib Dems, the rest of them. So this is the Iraq War I'm talking about, the megally illegal Iraq War, which, if we can sort of end on a happy note, there's this fantastic film that came out just before all this pandemic hit. I think it's called Official Secrets. Which is a brilliant feature film. There was hardly anyone in the theatre. It got terrible reviews, but it's a beautiful and a brilliant and actually, a proper old-style film. which tells a story of Catherine Gunn, who was working for the GCHQ in Cheltenham at the time of the Iraq War vote, and she leaked a document she was emailed accidentally, actually, talking about fixing the vote at the United Nations Security Council behind the Iraq War vote, and she thought this was disgusting. She leaked it to The Guardian, to I can't remember the name of the journalist who was the sort of middle person, but anyway, she worked for Press TV, by the way, I think, as well. Anyway, so that made the headlines just before the vote, and it was brilliant that they actually. And there's a whole the story of the film is brilliant. It shows you how things really work in this country and what goes on in newsrooms, which people don't often see, which is the battles to keep stories out of the press, and they battle to keep that one out, and some people battle to keep it in, like Martin Bright, for example, and. Then when that story goes out, everyone knows, the Americans are trying to fix the vote. They're doing this and that at the UN. And this, of course, made sure that it was going to be much more difficult for them to do so. So Catherine Gunn pretty much single-handedly, well, no, not single, that's not fair, because of the journalists and other people involved as well, getting it out in the Observer, made sure that was on the record as an illegal war, and that these people are war criminals. So people don't realise the Malaysian government actually did try Bush and Blair for the Iraq War, plus Zippy Livni as a war criminal, and found them all guilty in absentia. So these people cannot go to Malaysia. If they go to Malaysia, they'll be arrested as they land at the airport. Yeah.
Well, let's take them.
So Malaysia, they've done an amazing job, the Malaysians. In fact, they had a crooked prime minister come in a few years ago, and then he was booted. Once he was out of office, an old fellow in his 70s who was a former really lovely prime minister guy came in, and it's the 1MDB scandal, and what they've done is they've arrested the former prime minister for stealing all the country's money. It's all Goldman Sachs doing this, of course, which is the Bilderberg's favourite bank. And I met some of these people at the Bilderberg conference in 2016, which was fascinating, to meet them all, and also to be liaising with the professional, German press. Giving them tips, them giving us tips. Brilliant. The Bilderberg meeting is not to be missed, but it'd be very sad because it doesn't look like they're going to be having any more in the open. They don't need to. They already control politics almost 100%. They control the senior figures in the major parties. Boris is not, has not been to Bilderberg. He's not really one of them, but then he's very pliable. His girlfriend is into Aleister Crowley. As you know, Carrie Simmons, you might have seen that she's been in these Aleister Crowley plays. So I think she's kind of, he's a sort of weak bloke, and, he's completely unfitted to be Prime Minister, but he's going to get Brexit done, apparently. And so they managed to get him in on that ticket by sabotaging the Labour Party, because if Corbyn had been pro-Brexit, he would have won, almost certainly. But he was persuaded not to be, which is a stupid thing to do. You've had a referendum. And there's a massively funded Remain campaign still going on, right, in 2019, and you're convinced by the press that this Remain thing still has got legs. You're joking, aren't you? Now, let me tell you, because although it wasn't a highly won vote, right, so whatever it was, 52% or something, the country is, and normal people are like this. If there's been a vote on something, we're going to do even if I didn't vote for it, we're going to do it the way it came out, all right? So you'll find that after the Brexit vote, you've got something like 70% of people in Britain want Brexit to happen. And you're not going to win by being anti-Brexit or by flim-flamming, Jeremy. You should know that if you're a decent political animal. Anyway, it'd be fascinating to see if his brother does quite well in the mayoral elections in London. I mean, this is a fascinating time politically, because Farage has kind of shown the way with UKIP. After that got infiltrated by Tommy Robinson and his Zionist intelligence agents, and I like him to David Icke, actually. Tommy Robinson, he puts out some great information, but it's also mixed with toxic stuff, exactly like Icke, from a different angle. So Piers Corbyn may do quite well. It'll be interesting to see if he adopts this tactic that Nigel Farage did with the Brexit Party. As soon as your party's taken over and infiltrated, you just step sideways with all the trusted friends. You start something new, and within 5 minutes, everybody gets the message, and they're into your new party, and they're voting for you, as they did in the European elections the other year. You know, so you need to be lithe. Don't stick with some dead old Labour Party if it's been totally controlled and taken over. And I think we'll see something, you know, grow out of the left, which is going to be a little bit more sensible and into the kind of socialism that I grew up with, which was privatised, not privatised, nationalised railways, nationalised water, nationalised buses, basically, nationalise stuff. If it's infrastructure, nationalise it. And you know what the most important bit of infrastructure is to nationalise, James?
What's that?
The banks. Have it all run at cost, with no fat cat bosses and no shareholders. Thank you very much. The disgusting situation we're in now with our gas and electricity is if you've got about 10 grand spare, which loads of people have, of course, you invest it in your gas company and your water or your electricity company, and your share dividends pay all your bills. So you never have to pay a gas bill again. Now that is just disgusting. That people who have £10,000 to spare never have to pay for gas or electricity, but people who have got no money at all or are running on credit cards have got to pay loads of money for gas and electricity. This is disgusting. It's a fraud. It's a cheat.
I never knew that, Tony. That is disgusting.
It's a cheat, you know. So none of this infrastructure should be. We should run it as we used to do with public boards where people can go, members of the public can go along to the board meeting and you can eyeball the guys running it, and they run it at cost. And they were some fantastic people when I was a kid running these nationalised industries and doing a fantastic job of it. And then there's the press come along, they're making a mess of it. We're going to have to. That was just Thatcherism, and it was a horrendous disaster. You know, I can remember at the time thinking, this is the family silver, they're selling it all off, you know, we're going to be preyed on from it forevermore now. And now, I had no idea at the time where it was all heading, but it's now heading to this situation where we've got, you know, something like 1 million people in Britain having trouble paying their mortgage or their rent, and they're now about to be criminalised in this police crime. Well, I just call it the police state bill of Priti Patel's. You know, 1 million people turned into criminals overnight because they can't afford somewhere to live. This is not the Britain I grew up with, and it's a foreign agent's version of Britain. They want to destroy this country, and we're not going to let them.
No, we're not. We're not. Like I say, this is why I wanted to speak to you, to be honest, Tony, because you come from a different angle from what a lot of people I've watched, probably. You know what I mean? And I just respect you so much because you hit the nail on the head, for me anyway, with the information you give, you see.
Well, I hope so. The thing is, not many people have got the time to be looking into things every day like I do, and also to have the amazing, particularly with the pandemic, is been speaking to some of these amazing, wonderful doctors, beautiful bloody people. They really are. They've got the guts to speak out, but the press is just turning a deaf ear to them. And in fact, smearing them, yeah? But this is the second opinion you go to when you go to the doctor and you think, God, this guy's a bit of a shifty guy. What's he, is he making money out of me, you know? And you think, I'm going to go and get a second opinion on this, you know, and that's what all these other doctors are giving us, is a true opinion, a second opinion. And most of the rest of them are just, you know, like I saw many journalists, of course, when I was working in mass media, who were just 9-to-5ers, you know, they don't care about the listeners or the viewers. And then we're increasing numbers of those. As I was saying, in the late 80s and into the 90s, you could see there were people that were just in it for the ego, or just, you know, making money and didn't care about the listeners and the viewers. You know, I was very much aware of the important job I was doing, and I've had a unique, you know, time really through the 90s and the noughties and up till now, but doing a lot of journalism, and I've met I was working very closely with George Monbiot and people like that in the environmental movement. I've seen the drift to green fascism in the Green Party, you know, where we've got now a horrific version of greenism, which is Monbiot's largely part of. Actually, after Fukushima, he came out as I think he was before, actually, pro-nuclear. As for an environmentalist, what the hell do you think you're doing? You're talking rubbish. You're just working for the other side. And you're an infiltrator. And this stuff about nuclear is total nonsense, of course, you know. So I would you know, prefer that we use much, much less energy, like they used to with the railways. This is a whole other thing, actually, is beaching and the railways. The destruction of the railways was done for and by the oil industry, because the Americans, well, it was done by the bankers, because we had a brilliant. When I was growing up as a lad, right? This is I suppose I mean, okay, I was born in the early '60s, and this was just sort of happening then, but. We had a fantastic network of railways all over the country, and people could travel on public transport anywhere, fast, cheaply, comfortably. They could chat to strangers in the carriage and have all sorts of fascinating conversations, like they would if they were now, and talking about pandemics and conspiracies and God knows what else, as people do, like down the pub, etc. But no, you've got to be in the car and you've got to be listening to the radio, yeah? This is a part of all of this, destruction of the railways. They don't want people having interaction with others, and they want to control their minds through mass media rather than people having chit chats or whatever. So that was all done by the oil industry and the banks. So we had a situation in the early 60s where the Brits had discovered oil in the North Sea and they wanted to get it out and make some money, but the Americans didn't want them to. They said, well, look, if you start getting oil out of the North Sea, you're going to depress the world oil price, right? We don't like that. So we will only help you do it if you massively increase demand for oil in Britain by having loads of cars and building motorways. So we did. And that's why we got cars everywhere, and no trains, proper trains anymore. Is all due to that little deal, which was done. Okay, you can have your oil rigs now. We'll help you pump oil out of the North Sea. Now you've destroyed your railway system, and everyone's going over to private cars. And then, of course, all those private cars have created loads of pollution, and killing people. And there was also the scheme in London when I was I was living there in the 80s. We had Ken Livingstone. Doing his job it was called Fares Fair, where he was reducing every few months. He reduced the bus fare. I remember going to school and thought, I've only got to pay, I've got tuppence off my bus fare today. Amazing. And it was going down to zero. He didn't want people to pay anything for public transport. It was all coming off a subsidy of the rates. And if you were a tourist, I'm not sure I think even tourists were going to get free transport as well in London. And what it did is it reduced deaths on the roads massively, and accidents massively. So you could go by car, no one's going to stop you, but if you've got free public transport, people are going to get rid of their cars. And that's what Ken was doing in London. So that was an amazing thing that they did in the 80s, but it was all sabotaged, and then they closed the whole GLC down. That's how much they hated what he was doing there. That's, to me, is sensible socialism, where you've got By the way, Jesus was a communist. They held everything. Yeah, they did. The disciples held everything in common, and Judas, I'm afraid, was the bad apple. But he held the money bag, and they only had one pot of money, and they gave to everyone whatever they needed, and their donations all went into the same pot. That's kind of communism, isn't it? So the idea of Marx, it seems to me, was to have all those ideals, Christian ideals, but to take God out of the equation. So you mustn't have God, but you can have all the rest. And that, was obviously a recipe for disaster. And by the way, Russia now has got building more new churches than anywhere else in the world. And the Orthodox Church is doing really well over in Russia. And they have rebuilt the big cathedral, which Stalin got rid of, in Moscow. Had done a fantastic job, rebuilt it almost exactly the same as the original, which we visited when I was in Moscow a few years ago, 2015 or something. It's an absolutely amazing place, beautiful. And the singing, you can't really describe it. Beautiful stuff. But no, oh gosh, it's all prejudiced, and we've got to get rid of this religion because it's so prejudiced. Oh, look, come on. Yeah, what they want is a religious war, James. That's what they want, and they want to blame religion for everything. And then they'll come along with their own religion, saying, "Well, we don't need all these silly monotheistic faiths, and the Bible. Well, let's just throw it in the bin, and we've got a better religion for everybody." Yeah. Do you think people are going to buy it? Of course, they're not.
No, I don't think we are. And this is making people like myself, Tony, going out there and educating myself and finding people like you and having these conversations and getting more educated about these subjects, because we as the common people, we need to stand up now. That's the only way I see it, and it's just because you are right, we have been dumbed down a lot, and it's very evident to see. But I feel like there has been a little bit of a shift going on with normal people. That they want their hunger
Yeah, well, we're wearing our masks. Okay, we're wearing our masks, a lot of us, but that doesn't mean to say we believe in them. Yeah, that's a whole nother question. Yeah, so there's the one thing I love is so funny. The anarchists love this. They love masks. Yes, they love masking up. Because they're right to mask up. If they're going to be, being very naughty and active or whatever, and I don't know, taking the police on, they've got to be masked up. And they're quite right to do that. If they want to be in that situation, it's stupid to have your face shown. You just get your picture taken, you'll be arrested the next day. So there's a lot of sort of, the anarchists are terrible, they kill the bill people, whatever, they're terrible. They're not. They're against the same crooked system as the rest of us are, but they're just taking a different manner. I remember when we were involved in the Newbury bypass protest years ago, there were sort of violent types that would come and go and attack the spies. They were some sort of like private security firm. And, you got Friends of the Earth stupidly saying, oh, we condemn what they... No, don't condemn them. Say you would not do the same thing, but don't condemn them. The people to condemn are the real enemy, and the real enemy in this case are people like Priti Patel and Bill Gates. The real problem for the powers that be right now is, guess what? It's if Black Lives Matter, the anarchists, the squatters, the travellers, the anti-maskers, the anti-lockdown people, Extinction Rebellion and the rest all unite against this tyranny. And if those people all get together against the government, they don't, particularly with this anti-protest bill, this police state bill, they don't stand a chance, James. They really don't, because against a united front, people that can all agree on some basic ideas. And you know what? The best I've seen is the Yellow Vests manifesto, which is a brilliant manifesto. It's all about, sort of people power, and we want, have a fair society where nobody is so poor that society does its first job is to look after the poorest and make sure they've got a roof over their head, make sure they've got something to eat, make sure they've got water. Let's just look after our poor, and from that point on, we can start to build a much more fairer and sensible, safer society. And that to me, if you haven't seen them, check them out. They're on signsofthetimes.net. The Yellow Vest Manifesto is a brilliant united front. Everyone can just pick that up and go, yeah, that's very good, that's very sensible. By the way, it's against the Brussels. Surprise, surprise. They're very anti-Brussels. They want, because what's happening in France now, right now as we speak, you've got a 7 p.m. curfew in France. If you want to go anywhere outside your immediate local area, you've got to sign a form and you've got to take it with you. And if the police stop you, if you don't produce it, you're arrested and fined, etc. Most of the Yellow Vest people that I was in touch with have been either jailed or fined into poverty. That's what's going on in France now. They know this is a Nazi occupation, basically. It's the same sort of conditions that was when the Nazis were there. And, that's what they're getting under the EU. At least it's not quite that bad here. And I suppose I should round up by just talking about some of the websites I've got now. I contribute to something called The Land Is Ours, which is a part of the campaign I was doing in the 1990s, which is all about land rights. And, essentially everyone needs some land. We've got 50 million acres in Britain and about 60, 70 million people, so give me my half an acre, that sort of attitude. And we've got plenty of land out there. It's not as if there isn't enough. They love depriving us of land. That's what they did in the enclosures, and they don't want to give it back. And so there's that. There's also the 9/11 forum. That's 911, the numbers, 911forum.org.uk. Which is, we started back in about 2003, 2004, which has got loads of stuff about, geopolitics, assassinations, various conspiracies, plots, loads of stuff about the 9/11 attacks and 7/7, which we've investigated over the years. And by the way, there was another article in the Mail just the other day about that. There's some more stuff coming with Matt Campbell reopening the inquest he hopes for his brother who died in the 9/11 attacks. So, this is all stuff going on and on and on, really. But that's a good little place to get. It's like a basic sort of multi-blog that I've done, and there's various other contributors on there too. What else? So then there's also the Bilderberg.org, which has got all the original stuff. I spent months and months in the Bodleian Library in Oxford back in the 90s, digging out everything I could find on Bilderberg, on the origins of it. So that's all on there, including a brilliant article in The Economist about them, which was a sort of piss take of Bilderberg, which was done over Christmas when they had the deputy editor running The Economist. The main editor was off on holiday or something, and so they slipped that little one in. There's all sorts of interesting stuff if you go back and have a look through some of the old articles about, and also some of the extracts from books about, the origins of the Nazi origins of the Bilderbergs, and what their real object was, and how they were so closely connected to NATO, the so-called North Atlantic Treaty Organisation, which is in Afghanistan. What the hell are they doing over there anyway? But that was just, the Nazis and the Americans and us getting together to try and, start the next World War, basically. And then finally, that's Bilderberg.org, which was the domain name initially was paid for me, because I was absolutely broke at the time, in about 96, by the sister, I think, of one of Henry Kissinger's goddaughters. Amazingly enough, I don't know if he knew that, but he probably does now. Anyway, so that's Bilderberg.org, and there's links to my books on there too, which I'll wind up with in a minute. And then there's the show page, the radio show I do every week, which is thisweek.org.uk. With Martin Summers, who's a former aid worker in Bosnia. I disagree with him about loads of stuff, but it's a genuine show. I mean, James, I get sick of seeing this stuff on the TV, which is all stage managed. The questions are all pre-prepared. The people are all got something to sell, and they're making out they haven't. These so-called experts who are paid by, they've all got, they've got something to sell us. And we never do that. We're genuine. Martin and I have some real full-on rows sometimes on there over things. He's.
Say that again. What radio station is that?
Well, it's not a radio station anymore. I was booted off Bristol Community Radio by this boss Pat Hart, who's friends with the mayor in Bristol. He's been friends with him since they were teenagers. Someone was telling me the other day. And he's booted me off the radio. That's thisweek.org.uk. That's online at the moment, and also on radio. It's also broadcast on radioquk.com on Sundays, and streamed live by them as well. So anyone that is around that would like to stream or use that show, please do. Just credit us, and we'll credit you. That's the way it works. So that's online at thisweek.org.uk with all the links to the stuff we talk about on the radio show up on that page. Obviously I'm looking for a radio station. I'm trying to negotiate with some local stations at the moment around Bristol, but not getting very far. And we'll see how that goes. But, if anyone's got any thoughts and ideas and or wants to, rather than suggest to me, suggest to, say, a radio station somewhere. And if they're interested, then get in touch with me. And that, I think, that's this week. Oh, the books, yeah. So in the Halloween lockdown, I was so pissed off. Boris announced this thing as the moon was rising on Halloween, right? I don't know if you remember that last October. And he even did it, I think didn't he do it on a Sunday or Saturday or something, which they never do. So that was Halloween. Anyway, I actually watched that moon come up as I was listening to Boris announcing the latest lockdown, right? So I was really annoyed. We know lockdowns don't work. You're just a puppet of Bill Gates, Boris. And everyone has got to have a bad time and be sad because of you this Christmas. Thank you very much. And you're basically part of the dark forces. It's absolutely obvious to me. And so that Halloween lockdown, I thought, I've got these various books I've been trying to get published, and I just got a refusal for the guy that actually paid me to write the book, and then he said, "Oh, look, I'm having problems over here. I'm just going to have to say no." He'd lost one of his best editors, and he was having money trouble. Anyway, he said, "No, I can't publish this. I'm sorry." So I thought, look, sod it. I'll just turn it into a PDF, and I'll publish it as an ebook, right? And so I published within 3 weeks. I published 3 books. One is the Martin Bormann Nazi, not Martin Bormann Nazi in Exile, the Traitors of Arnhem, which is about the origins of the Bilderberg conferences. So I published that as an ebook. and that's about 100 pages, but it's got most of what we've been talking about tonight in the detail and the evidence for it. So then I also did a thing called The Siege of Heaven, which is the book I'd written for Chris at Trinity Day, and that is really a series of my articles, but it's broken up into sections, and each article has got a little explanation as to what it's about. So that includes my investigation into the beaching cuts in the 1960s, and it includes my investigation into Arnhem. It's got an investigation into Freemasonry, all sorts of stuff in there. But that's an articles collection. That's called The Siege of Heaven. And it's also got, as is the next one, it's got a historical timeline. So I've done a historical timeline to help me as much as anything else to go through the whole of history, really, looking at, really important changes, things like the Peasants' Revolt, the Crusades, and God knows what else, It's fascinating. History, to me, is untangling all the time. Almost, particularly this stuff with Rudolf Hess recently, suddenly, right, it's all become clear. What was that all about? Now we know. And they this is what annoys me. Another thing is they say, oh, God, we will never know. Well, actually, we do know. We know who killed Kennedy. We know why. We know who did it. And he's still around, but the press don't want to know. They just turn the other way. So that's those are the first two books, The Traitors of Arnhem and The Siege of Heaven. And the final one's called The Siege of Heaven Reader, which I was using as a reference point, which is a whole load of extracts from various books since the end of the medieval period, really, which are about secret power, hidden power, and spiritual destruction of spirituality. Since then, the idea that we've got to basically get rid of the idea of God and convince people there is no God, and lie to them, and you keep lying, and hopefully they'll get it eventually, and they'll give up on the idea of God. So. But most importantly, the whole thing about secret societies, looking at the Bavarian Illuminati particularly, and how they... I mean, there's a most amazing book written in 1793 called The Proofs of a Conspiracy Against All the Religions and Governments. And I first got that... I had to get it from the States because it was so expensive. It was like £200 to get a copy in Britain. Online, and reading through it, I'm just like, wow, this is, there's loads of quotes from the original Illuminati which explain exactly what they were going to do. There's a whole load of stuff in there about how they fomented the French Revolution, because this is very, very important. This is a really important thing to understand, is the French Revolution was... People go on about guillotines. This was the Illuminati style of doing things, right? This is basically mob rule. But they were working out, how do we control the mob? And this is what I think they do now. They love the idea, through people like Tommy Robinson and David Icke, to sort of control people's minds, to get loads of people thinking the same thing at the same time. This is their game. So there's loads of stuff in there about the Masons. There's some great essays by Dennis Wheatley, who was an absolute expert in the occult, and of course he wrote the great occult novel, as I said, of the 20th century, The Devil Rides Out, a fantastic novel, and it really does explain how it all works, that novel, and it's a terrific read, and actually a film as well. It's a film, Hammer film, which is never shown on TV anymore, of course, like all the best stuff. And so there's that in there, his ideas, because I think he was a Mason. He never actually said it, but I think he was a Freemason. But he had access to all sorts of interesting information through his military connections in World War II. He wrote the Nazi plan to invade Britain for the British, so they could prepare for a Nazi invasion, for example. He was a deception planner. He was involved in the deceptions around D-Day to make the Germans think that we were going to Calais. In fact, he was so successful that the Germans kept something like 20 divisions in Calais 3 weeks after D-Day because they were convinced, no, the main invasion is going to come in Calais. So they completely fooled them. And that was Wheatley for you. He really knew how it all worked. And he wrote several novels about the occult and the way that they operated. He wrote one about the Second World War, a terrific novel called The Satanist, about U.S. Army or U.S. Navy, I think he was. Oh no, U.S. Air Force Satanists in Suffolk. Which is really good. I mean, anyway, so Wheatley's essays on the occult are brilliant because he actually had dinner. He invited over for dinner people like Aleister Crowley to squeeze him, to pick his brains about how it all worked and things like that. So anyway, he was one of the great best-selling authors, but he's hardly talked about at all now because, of course, it's all taboo, this brilliant knowledge. So that's The Siege of Heaven Reader, and that also finishes up with the historical timeline too, and all those are available as ebooks via bilderberg.org. But you can't share it on Facebook because they've just blocked bilderberg.org. They think it's something, dangerous content. I noticed.
I tried to actually tag it to one of my friends earlier today on Facebook, and they've blocked you.
Well, quite why I'm not sure. But anyway, so I mean, if people want to just pick up, the other thing is I do a weekly email out. You can just email me at email me. The contact tab is at thisweek.org.uk, and you'll find my email address and Martin's as well there, and various others. You can even email the station manager, who's the Blairite mayor's buddy that booted me off the airwaves. I mean, I've been taken off air by bigger people than Bristol Community Radio. Yeah.
Mate. This is what I mean, but do you know what? I'm so happy that you've came here and done this and come and spoke to me and my group, and honestly, it's just great. Honestly, Tony, with all the information as well, and I'll put some links as well into for you if Facebook allows it. But I'll put some links in. But it's been such a pleasure, Tony.
Well, right, James, lovely to see, and I hope that we can maybe pick up on any questions. One of the things I do love is answering questions. So maybe if you can collate any questions that your group has, happy to answer anything, because that's what it's all about, isn't it? It's a two-way thing. Media is not just about, some ivory tower spitting on people and murdering them. It's about a two-way conversation, and that's the way I see it. Is the media is the nervous system of humanity, right? This is how we as humanity function. We communicate through the mass media. That's how it should work, and it should be a two-way communication. Yeah. So it's not just the brain telling the fingers what to do. It's the fingers saying, "Ouch! Actually, that hurts, brain." It's got to be two-way. It's got to be two-way. Actually, I should do some sort of. I mean, we don't do a phone-in, but it would be lovely to do that on some sort of other platform because we can barely have time in 3 hours. We're doing every week now. We used to do 2, so I barely have time in 3 hours to do everything. Just impossible with all the clips and all the various stuff, all the stuff going on now. So it's 3 hours a week. But the thing to do is just download it and listen to it in the car or something, or where somewhere if you're out jogging or something. And with that, I hope that listeners will be able to pretty much be up to speed on everything that's going on around the world, and they won't be bamboozled by these treacherous mainstream press.
Yes, thank you, Tony. No, honestly, it means a lot, and I'll definitely get back to you with. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions.
A final thought, though. The journalists are not to blame, believe it or not. They're really not, because I know loads of them through the union, and it's the media editors and the media managers and the owners. They're the problem, and amazingly, Rupert Murdoch not at the moment. Amazingly. Because if you look at Sky, everyone thinks Sky is Murdoch. No, it isn't. It's Comcast. They bought it off Murdoch a couple of years ago. So he couldn't get a franchise or something in the UK and say, oh, well, Sky, let it go. I don't need that. But he's got Fox News in the States, and he's got Talk Radio here. And this is, it's the managers and the owners that are the real problem here, because they just see this as a way of, it's basically like advertising. So this is it. We're using this system now to just tell people what to think. The journalists would love to write stuff which is more true. In fact, often they do, and it gets censored. As I was saying with Mark Hollingsbaum at The Guardian on 7/7 earlier. So the journalists are just sitting there waiting to go. That all they need is decent networks and outlets, people like me, to let the people know what's happening to them and stop this mass media and all these evil people that run it, and they are evil, a lot of these, if you meet them face to face, you think, God, my God, you're a freak. They're feeding the general public into a mincing machine. That's what they're basically doing. And, that is how treacherous these people are. And they could be a force for good, but they just simply choose not to be. And, we need to obviously keep an alternative media going, but we need to have also a mass media which makes them accountable. I think the transmitters. Think about who owns the transmitters and who owns the printing presses, because it ain't the journalists.
Yeah, and we are seeing. People aren't really turning, aren't they? I think everyone's turning at some point to it. What do I mean by that? Like how you just said about there is good journalists still out there, but they're getting censored. That was probably getting censored more than we was getting on Facebook at that time. Do you know what I mean? I feel like
it's what happens. It's self censorship. So they realise what lines they're allowed to cross and what they're not, and they want to keep their job. And fair play to them. Because we need. There is still some half decent journalists. You know what? The other day on the BBC, I don't know why or how it happened. This was it Sunday night on the BBC? They had their guy saying, "Oh, and by the way, this vaccine passport business. I don't know why we're having a vaccine passport. This is on the BBC main news." He says, "Because we've had the flu for ages and ages, and we've never done anything like this. And actually, there were so many deaths of the flu, same as COVID." So I don't know why, and they just slip this, and this is because these journalists are getting fed up with the lies. A lot of them are, and so we need to find some better outlet for them. That's what I'm basically saying. That we can, and obviously the social media. We've all been chased from the mainstream news onto social media, and the social media is now shutting down. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Yeah, it is.
They're trying to corral us. They're just corralling us like useless eaters. There's a really horrible side to all of this, James, which I suppose is a bad thing to finish on. But it's like natural selection. People who aren't up to speed with how evil the system is now are falling like flies. They're getting loads of vaccines which might potentially kill them down there. They're taking part in a Mengele experiment, which is totally against the Nuremberg Code to have this vaccine passport, coercing millions of people, lying to them, etc. And people who aren't quite so intelligent are just going along with it, and they may die as a result. So there's a horrible kind of Darwinistic, social Darwinistic. Natural selection, survival of the fittest, and we're fitter than you are because we just conned you into injecting poison into yourself. It's hideous, man. This is what they're up to. But at least there's still loads of other places to get information. Thank God, still. And anyone with a half a brain, I think. I mean, there's loads and loads of people out there. I was saying with the masks, who are wearing the masks. They're polite, they're British, they're polite, and they don't want to upset people. They don't want to cause a confrontation. But at the end of the day, they don't believe in it at all.
Yeah, I've got to totally agree with this because I've tried to explain this. I don't choose my friends anyway on what they wear or what they inject into their bodies, regardless if I think it's right or wrong. And I think if we can come from that approach and stop trying to fall for the trap of politicising it and pushing these people away, because a lot of people, they put it on because they just don't want to be a nuisance, you know what I mean? I don't want the security guard coming over to me, and all this, I don't want to be a scene or anything. But they probably stand there and think, I don't believe in this, though.
Yeah, so anyway, onward and upward, and watch out for the Four Horsemen, watch out for the Antichrist, have a look at Tim Cohen's book, The Antichrist and a Cup of Tea, if you really want to go up a level and, discover something really mind-blowing, and have a listen to the interview I did with him. Another really good interview recently, if I'm allowed to say that sort of thing, is with a guy called Roland Perry, who's an Australian journalist at Melbourne University, and he used to work in London. He wrote a book in 93, I think it was, called The Fifth Man, which is about Victor Rothschild. Now, I have a bone to pick with Victor Rothschild because he was the guy that sacked the Director General in 1987. Alistair Milne, whose son, Seamus Milne, was a Guardian columnist, a brilliant Guardian columnist who became Jeremy Corbyn's spin doctor and rather messed things up. But anyway, Seamus is a lovely guy, I'm sure, and, his father was sacked by Victor Rothschild. People don't realise this. Victor Rothschild was a very, very, it was one of the last acts he did before he died in 1990. He'd been a traitor right the way through the Cold War. He was leaking loads of stuff to the Russians all the time. And but people thought he was above reproach. He's a peer of the realm, And through the war, he was sending stuff to Stalin before even Churchill knew about it. It's a brilliant book, Roland Perry's book, The Fifth Man. So we had Burgess and Maclean, the Cold War spies, the Cambridge spy ring. Then Philby and Anthony Blunt, who was the keeper of the Queen's pictures. And then who was the fifth man? Well, in the 1980s, the finger was starting to point at Victor Rothschild, but he managed to divert it because he was very powerful. Obviously, he was a peer, but he was also in the security services unofficially, and he was selecting chiefs of the security services, even as Peter Wright says in the Spy Catcher. And he was an incredibly powerful figure, but he was a Labour peer, but he was pro privatisation and stuff during the Thatcher years. Anyway, a very, very interesting figure. He decided not to get involved in the banking part of the Rothschild family, but to do something else, which was create the State of Israel, and that's what he basically did by helping the Russians all the way through World War II. Then he made sure after World War II, when it came to the votes on Israel, as we were talking about earlier with Nelson Rockefeller, that the Russians were behind it. Now, this is, amazing, really, because this was in the Cold War turned out to be like a crusader state for the Americans in the Middle East, and the Russians being behind that. Well, the only way they did that was because Victor Rothschild had been their buddy and friend and was feeding loads of great information right the way through the Cold War. And anyway, that's a fantastic novel. I mean, not a novel. It's a factual book, and I interviewed Roland just before Christmas, picked him up. Did about an hour where he takes us through, Victor Rothschild's role in modern history, which is absolutely astronomical. Now, if you look anywhere, you'll find, oh God, you must be an anti-Semite to say something like that. Well, it was actually a Jewish publisher that said, yeah, let's go for it, to Roland. So there's nothing anti-Semitic about him at all. And he's just stating facts. This guy was part of a plot to create the State of Israel. And he ended up sacking the Director General in the last decent Director General of the BBC. So I have a bone to pick with Victor Rothschild, even though he's dead and gone. And it was actually Marmaduke Hussey was the chairman of the BBC at the time, and he wrote in his biography, "Chance governs all." That was what happened. That Victor Rothschild approached him. I picked that up as soon as it came out. I thought, guys, see what he's got to say about that incident, And he makes it clear Victor Rothschild approached him to sack the Director General of the BBC. And by the way, the BBC had all sorts of trouble with Marmaduke Hussey because he was married to the Chief Lady in Waiting of the Queen, right? So this is the establishment for you. And he never had a television. He was made chairman of the BBC and told you're going to have to. I think maybe it was something to do with one of the ITV companies, and he had to get a TV before he was allowed to be in charge of the TV company. As the chairman, he never had one. He didn't see a point of it. It's all a load of rubbish on there, I suppose. What he was thinking. But anyway, I suppose the lesson is that we've got to have independent broadcasting. We've got to, if we don't have that, basically, your kids are mincemeat, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, on that note, Tony, I'm going to thank you for coming on.
For a bit of independent broadcasting, yeah, a bit of independent broadcasting, lovely.
Lovely.
Anytime.
Like I said, I'm just learning now. So talking to somebody like yourself, getting this type of advice and etc. It's just amazing for me, to be honest. So
anyway, look, lovely. Thanks very much for inviting me. So the weekly show thisweek.org.uk. If people can make it, it'd be lovely to have you.
Yeah, definitely.
On a Friday. Oh, by the way, yeah, Fridays at 5 p.m. we kick off live. But that's normally I upload an MP3 at sort of 10 in the evening of that, 11 o'clock, something. Usually by 11. We've got a deadline of 11. To make sure that MP3 is available if people want to just grab it and listen late in the evening or the next day or whatever. So, or the States. Quite a few people download it in the States, which is obviously, that's 5, 6, 7 hours difference over there. But anyway, thanks very much for our first one. Maybe we'll do it again sometime, James, eh?
Yeah, definitely. I'd love to. Obviously, I'd love to.
Where are you, by the way? Look, where are you?
I'm in Stourbridge.
Oh, lovely. All right.
So I'm not far. Like from really, I'm in Stourbridge. Yeah, so I'm not too far. So.
Well, I'll tell you what. We do need to have physical gatherings of sorts as well. Because all this online stuff. This is one of the things about all this. They want to shove everybody online. I was talking about the trains earlier. Everybody has got to be connected up to the mind control system via their TV, their radio, and I don't think they quite understand. George Orwell worked for the BBC, of course, in the Second World War, and he was being told to do propaganda to India. And after a few weeks, he said, "I'm not doing any more of this." And his resignation letter is on the BBC website. Actually, it's well worth reading. He's saying it don't work. Yeah. So what propaganda ends up is you're convinced your propaganda is going through, but bit by bit, drip by drip, people they don't believe anything you say. It's like the idea of Boris endorsing the vaccine. Come on. This has the reverse effect. It's like Tony Blair saying, "Please, everybody, get the vaccine. It's really good for you." They're running out of ideas, I think, and they're very unimaginative, and they believe their own rubbish. They believe their propaganda works, which it don't, because no one will tell them. They like to see them making a mess. So this is going to end up on the right side will win. It's just a question of how and when, and I think so long as you keep fixed on that belief, you can just keep carrying on and keep saying.
Well, that's it. I've said it's like I don't want to speak ill of any other Facebook groups or anything like that, but like I've noticed a lot of them want to like raise money for buying whatever. To be honest, I'm just in this just to get the truth. I just want the truth, Tony, to be honest.
Well, one of the most important things is Brexit. I mean, this is at least we're now free of this United States of Europe. I mean, they obviously want us back in there, but I think we've got to have a stiff upper lip as the nation, as we did in 1939. Actually, no, 1940 was Churchill's famous speech. Just at the time of the Battle of Britain, where he's saying, we'll fight them on the beaches, blah, 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 all that stuff. And, he was in the Illuminati almost certainly, Churchill, because that's one of the things Dennis Wheatley says in his Devil and All His Works books. He would be, he probably was. But, there was a more sort of general kind of Christian attitude back in those days, before the sort of heady days of the 1960s and mass abortion and things like that. People had a different kind of mentality, and this is one of the things in China, of course. Is people have got their values as Muslims, and they're not going to be pushed around by President Xi. So I think they pushed us too far, basically, and they believe in their own propaganda. So they're on a hiding to nothing now.
I fingers crossed. I do see the wheels coming off this. I think more and more ordinary people are starting to think, do you know what? No, I've had enough now. You know what I mean? So I have to hold on to that.
Yeah, but just say no. If your listeners can get even just one of my books, I'd really appreciate it. And it's like a little donation. And I can assure you won't be bored. Yeah, there's loads of stuff in there. It's a lifetime, really. Well, 35 years of doing this stuff and doing it for the people, basically, rather than for the money. That's it. That's what Jesus threw the money changers out of the temple, didn't he? And what did he get for it? He got crucified. But at the end of the day, was it on the Friday, and then on the Sunday popped up again? You never lose heart, and remember that money is the root of all evil. So you make your decisions based on what you know is right, not what's going to bring the money in.
Yes, I love that. Thank you, Tony. Yeah, I totally agree. I'm always saying this: money's the root of all evil. Don't get me wrong; I need it to live, but that's as far.
Well, it's not. That's not quite the quote. The quote is: "The love of money is the root of all evil." Yeah. So money's there for a purpose, right? It's just a utility, and this is one of the things with the Yellow Vests as well. And as well as our land rights campaign, we're looking to get rid of any need for money. Okay, so we survived in this country up until the Romans came with no need for money. You don't need it to get water or food. now what they've done is they've tried to make it a necessity. In fact, it's become pretty much a necessity. And we need to get rid of that. So all the basic essentials of life should be free. That's what I think. If you want to buy a luxury yacht, then you can save up for it.
Yeah. I'm with you, Tony.
All right, James.
All right, then. Cheers then, Tony, and thank you for coming on. I'll definitely have you back again, 100%, and I'll definitely let people know where they can find you and find all your stuff and etc. But, yeah, thank you again, Tony.
God bless. And don't let the banksters get you down.
I won't.